The first contraction ripped through Sienna like a shard of glass, stealing her breath and her balance against the frost-slicked pine. She fell to her knees in the frozen mud, a choked cry escaping her lips before she could bite it back. The sound was swallowed by the vast, indifferent silence of the Blackwood. Around her, skeletal trees clawed at a bruised twilight sky, and the wind carried the iron tang of coming snow, and the distant, fading scent of her own pack. Silverfang Pack, her home, or what had been her home until 3 hours ago, when her beta, Kale, had looked at her swollen belly with disgust and pronounced her sentence. The Alpha's orders, Sienna. He cannot have a rogue's pup raised within his walls. You are to be gone before moonrise. She'd pleaded, her voice raw. Lucas would never, he's the father. Kale's smile had been a cold, thin thing. Alpha Lucas is mated to Alara now, his Luna. Your condition is an embarrassment, a stain on his new union. He says you are to go to your true mate, the rogue. He'd spat the last word like a curse. Consider it a mercy. He's letting you live. Mercy? Sienna clutched her stomach, another wave of pressure building low in her spine. This was no false alarm. The pup was coming, months too early, spurred by terror and the brutal 20-mile trek through territory crawling with predators both animal and supernatural. She was alone, exiled, and going into labor in the dead of winter in the lawless stretch between Silverfang lands and the desolate mountains, where rogues were rumored to die. That was my first mistake, she thought, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. Believing Lucas loved me. Believing the mate bond we felt was real, before his family arranged his political union with the strong, pure-blooded Alara. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the forest floor, followed by the snap of a branch. Sienna froze, her own pain forgotten in a surge of primal fear. It wasn't a wolf. It was something bigger. A bear, perhaps, woken early from its den. Or worse. Her silver-blonde hair, now matted with sweat and dirt, seemed to glow in the gathering dark, making her a perfect target. She scrambled behind the thick trunk of a fallen oak, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She could hear it sniffing, a wet, snuffling sound that grew closer. Little did I know, the bear was the least of my worries. The creature lumbered into the clearing, a massive grizzly, its eyes reflecting a dull, hungry intelligence. It caught her scent immediately, head swinging toward her hiding place. Saliva dripped from its jaws. Sienna's wolf, usually a subdued presence within her, whimpered and cowered. She was an omega, the lowest in the pack hierarchy. Her wolf was for comfort, for healing the bonds of others, not for fighting. Please, she whispered, the word a puff of frost in the air. The bear charged. Sienna squeezed her eyes shut, arms wrapping protectively around her belly. A roar filled the air, but it wasn't the bear's. It was a sound of pure, undiluted fury. Deep, resonant, and vibrating with a power that made her teeth ache. She opened her eyes in time to see a blur of midnight black fur crash into the bear's side. A wolf. But not just any wolf. It was enormous, larger than any pack wolf she'd ever seen, muscles coiling and bunching under a coat that seemed to drink the moonlight. It moved with a terrifying, silent grace that was at odds with its size. The rogue. The two beasts became a whirlwind of snapping teeth and tearing claws. The forest echoed with their bellows and snarls, the crunch of bone, the rip of flesh. Sienna watched, transfixed and trembling, as the black wolf fought with a brutal, efficient savagery. This wasn't the disciplined combat of a pack warrior. This was raw survival, every move designed to maim and kill. The bear, for all its size, was outmatched. With a final, wrenching twist, the black wolf broke its neck with an audible crack that made Sienna flinch. Silence descended, broken only by the wolf's heavy panting and the drip of blood on snow. Slowly it turned. Its eyes found hers. They were not the gold or blue of a typical wolf. They were a piercing, glacial silver, like chips of winter ice lit from within. They held no warmth, no recognition, only a feral assessing danger. This was no protector. This was another predator, and she was weak, vulnerable prey. He took a step toward her, his muzzle stained dark. Sienna tried to push herself back, but another contraction seized her, wringing a sharp cry from her lips. She curled around her stomach, waves of pain and terror crashing over her. The wolf stopped, its head tilted. Those silver eyes dropped to her rounded abdomen, then back to her face. The intensity of its gaze was a physical weight. Then the air began to shimmer around him. The sound was grotesque and mesmerizing, a sickening series of pops and cracks, the grating slide of bone reshaping, the wet tear of skin and muscle reknitting. Fur receded into pale, scarred skin. The wolf shrank, contorted, and rose. A man stood where the beast had been. He was naked, steam rising from his skin in the cold air. He was all hard lines and coiled strength, taller than any man in Silverfang. Scars mapped a history of violence across his chest and arms, claw marks, bite scars, a long, silvery gash that ran from his collarbone to his hip. His hair was as black as his fur, unruly and falling across his forehead. And his eyes, they were still that shocking, unsettling silver. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. "You're in my territory." His voice was a rough gravel, unused, as if he hadn't spoken to another soul in years. Sienna could only gasp, pain robbing her of words. She managed a shaky nod. "You're having a pup." It wasn't a question. "Why, yes." The word was a sob. He took another step closer, and Sienna caught his scent, pine and cold stone, wild storms, and beneath it, the rich, dark scent of earth and power. It was nothing like Lucas's polished, citrus and oak smell. This was untamed. It stirred something deep in her belly, something that had nothing to do with the labor. "Who cast you out?" he demanded, his voice cutting through her haze. "Silverfang," she panted. "Alpha Lucas." A flicker of something dark and knowing passed behind his silver eyes. "Lucas," he repeated, the name a curse. "And he sent you here, to me. He said to go to my true mate, the rogue." She was shaking uncontrollably now, from cold and pain and the sheer, overwhelming presence of him. The man, the rogue Alpha, went utterly still. His gaze sharpened, drilling into her. "Your name?" "Sienna." He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. For a long, terrifying moment, he said nothing. The wind moaned through the pines. Then his eyes widened just a fraction. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "Sienna," he repeated, and her name in his rough voice sounded like a secret. "I am Rylan." Rylan. The name meant nothing to her, just a whisper on the wind of old pack tales. The mad rogue, the king of the outcasts, the monster of the Blackwood. Another contraction, stronger than all the others, tore through her. She cried out, a raw, animal sound, and felt a warm gush of fluid soak her leggings. Her time was now. Here, in the snow before this terrifying stranger. Ryland's eyes dropped to the ground, then back to her face. His expression shifted, the feral edge softening into something like grim resolve. "The pup comes. You will freeze or bleed to death here." "I have nowhere," she whimpered. He moved then with that same preternatural speed. In one fluid motion, he scooped her into his arms. She was too weak, too consumed by pain to resist. His skin was furnace hot against her chill. The scent of him enveloped her, strangely calming the frantic pace of her heart even as it sparked a new, confusing awareness. "You do now," he growled, his voice a low vibration against her ear. He carried her through the trees, moving with sure-footed grace over the treacherous ground. Sienna buried her face against his shoulder, each jostling step sending fresh spikes of agony through her. She lost track of time, aware only of the relentless rhythm of her body and the solid, unyielding strength of the arms holding her. They came to a cliff face, hidden by a thick curtain of frozen ivy. Ryland shouldered through it, and the world fell away into darkness and sudden, shocking warmth. He had carried her into a cave, but it was no crude den. A small fire crackled in a pit, casting dancing shadows on walls that had been smoothed. Pelts were piled as bedding, and supplies, canned goods, tools, books were neatly stacked on natural stone shelves. This was a lived-in place, a home. He laid her gently on the thickest pile of furs near the fire. The warmth was a blessing, seeping into her frozen bones. "You need to push," he stated, kneeling beside her. There was no gentleness in his tone, only a stark, practical command. "I can't, you can't," horror washed over her. This stranger, this rogue, was going to deliver her baby. "Would you prefer I leave?" Those silver eyes pinned her. "The alternatives are death for you both. Choose." Sienna stared into his fierce, scarred face. She saw no pity there, but she saw no cruelty either, only a stark, unwavering will. She had no choice. She gave a tiny, desperate nod. What happened next was a blur of sweat, blood, and soul-rending pain. Ryland's hands were surprisingly capable, guiding her, his commands short and clear. "Breathe! Now push!" He was an anchor in the storm of her body's rebellion. In her delirium, between waves of torment, she saw him watching her, his brow furrowed, those strange silver eyes missing nothing. "It's coming," he said, his voice tight. One more. "Now, Sienna." With a final, tearing scream that scraped her throat raw, she pushed. A tiny, weak cry pierced the air, a sound so fragile it seemed impossible in this cave of stone and shadows. Ryland moved swiftly, wrapping the tiny, blood-slicked form in a soft pelt. He held the pup, a little boy, she saw through her tears, for a long moment, his face an unreadable mask in the firelight. Then he placed the squirming bundle on her chest. Sienna looked down at her son, his face scrunched and red, a dusting of silver-blonde hair on his head. A love so fierce it was a new kind of pain lanced through her. He was alive. They were alive. Ryland stood and moved to the fire, his back to her. His shoulders were tense. "He's early, small, but his lungs are strong." "Thank you," Sienna whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Ryland." He didn't turn. "Don't!" The word was harsh. He raked a hand through his dark hair. "Lucas didn't send you to me out of mercy, Sienna. He sent you to me as a weapon." The words, cold and deliberate, drained the warmth from the room. Sienna clutched her son closer. "What? No, he wanted me gone." Ryland finally turned. The firelight carved the planes of his face into sharp angles of shadow and light. His silver eyes glowed with a bitter, ancient knowledge. "He knew exactly where to send you. He knew I was here. He knows who I am." He took a step toward the cave entrance, looking out into the black night, his profile like a cliff against the sky. "Your pup," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that raised the hair on Sienna's arms. "He doesn't just carry your scent or Lucas's." He turned his head, and his gaze locked onto hers, filled with a storm of fury and a revelation that turned her blood to ice. "He carries mine." The word hung in the cave, colder than the wind outside. Weapon. Sienna's arms tightened instinctively around her sleeping son, his tiny chest a fragile bellows against her own. Ryland's scent, pine, iron, and winter filled the space, overwhelming the newborn's milky sweetness. His claim was impossible, a nightmare layered upon a nightmare. "You're lying," she whispered, her voice raw from labor and screams. I was with Lucas, only Lucas." Ryland didn't move from his place by the fire, a silhouette of contained power. The flames cast dancing shadows over the scars that mapped his torso. "Your nose doesn't lie, Omega. Even in your state, you can smell it. The pup carries my mark, not his." If only I had known the thought was a poison dart. Her mind, fogged with exhaustion and trauma, scrabbled for purchase. The mate bond with Lucas had felt so real, a golden thread in her soul. But in the last few months, it had thinned, frayed. Had that been her own weakening Omega spirit or something else? A log cracked in the fire, sending a shower of sparks upward. The sound made her flinch. "How?" The single word was torn from her. He was silent for a long moment, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. The wind outside moaned, a constant reminder of the frozen world beyond the ivy curtain. The last gathering, 2 years ago, at the neutral grounds near the Stone River. Sienna's blood ran cold. She remembered. The Silverfang pack had attended. There had been feasting, displays of strength. Lucas, then the heir apparent, had been in his element. She, a low-ranking Omega, had stayed on the edges, serving. The night had been warm, the air thick with the scent of rival packs and spilled ale. "I was there," Ryland continued, his voice a low rumble. "Not as a guest. I was watching the boarders. Lucas and we had words. It ended as it always did." His hand absently traced a thick, ropey scar that ran from his collarbone to his ribs. "Later, I caught a scent, pure, unburdened by pack politics. It led into the moonlit woods. A fragment of memory surfaced, hazy and dreamlike, a feeling of being watched. The glint of amber eyes in the darkness, not gold like Lucas's, a deep, unfamiliar voice saying her name. She had dismissed it as stress, as fantasy. Omegas didn't attract the attention of strange alphas, especially not rogue ones. "You were under a weeping silverwood tree," he said, and the specificity shattered her denial. "You looked lost." "I don't remember you," she insisted, but it was a weak protest. "You wouldn't," he stated, no malice in it, just cold fact. "Lucas made sure of that. He found us. He was enraged, not because his Omega was compromised, but because I was the one who'd found you. He pulled you away. The next day you had no memory of the encounter. A strong alpha can cloud a weak Omega's mind, especially one he's already bonded to. He buried it, and he kept you." The revelation was a physical blow. Sienna's stomach churned. The mate bond, had it ever been real or a gilded cage built on a lie? Had all of it, the whispered promises, the stolen moments, been a game to Lucas? A way to spite Rylan. "Why are you telling me this now?" Her voice trembled. "Because you're here," he said, as if it were obvious. "Lucas cast you out, pregnant with a pup he knew wasn't his. He didn't just exile you, Sienna. He delivered you to my territory, knowing the Blackwood would kill you or I would find you. Either outcome serves him. Your death is a tragedy. Your survival is a provocation." He stood then, unfolding his massive height, and the cave suddenly felt smaller. Sienna shrank back against the pelts. What happened next changed everything. He moved not toward her, but to a shadowed alcove, pulling out a worn leather satchel. "He wants a war," Rylan said, his back to her. "But he's too cowardly to start it himself. So he sends a weapon, a broken Omega and a newborn pup. If I turn you away, you die, and he can rally the packs against the monster of the Blackwood. If I keep you," he turned, his gaze landing on the child in her arms. "Then he has proof I've stolen his pack's Omega and her child, a just cause for invasion." The strategic cruelty of it was so perfectly Lucas. Political, clean, and utterly vicious. She was a pawn. Her son was a pawn. "He didn't know," she breathed, a desperate, final hope. "He couldn't have known the baby was yours. My pregnancy, it came after he ended things with me." Rylan's laugh was a short, harsh sound. He knew. The timing, the faded bond, the scent on you that never quite left. He knew, and he waited. Waited until you were most vulnerable, then cut you loose. He tossed the satchel at the foot of her bed of pelts. "There are supplies. Herbs for your healing, clean cloths, a skin of goat's milk. The pup will need it soon." The kindness, so starkly at odds with his appearance and his words, confused her utterly. "You're helping us." "I'm assessing the weapon," he corrected, his tone glacial. "I need to know its range, its capability. Rest. Feed him. Your body is weak. The Blackwood will finish you if the shock doesn't." He moved toward the cave entrance, pushing aside the frozen ivy. The howl of the wind surged inward, carrying the scent of snow and deep, wild forest. "Where are you going?" The question left her in a panic. Monster or not, he was the only solid thing in her collapsing world. To hunt and to think. His amber eyes glowed in the dark opening. "The Silverfang border is a day's hard run from here. Lucas will have scouts watching, waiting for smoke, waiting for a sign. Your survival changes his calculus. We need to change ours." And then he was gone, the ivy curtain falling back into place, leaving her alone with the crackling fire, the sleeping infant, and the devastating truth. Time blurred. Sienna tended to her son, her movements mechanical. She cleaned him with the damp cloths Rylan had left, wrapped him in the softest pelt. When he nuzzled and fussed, she tried to feed him, but her body was too traumatized, too empty. With trembling hands, she followed Rylan's instructions, warming the goat's milk slightly by the fire and trickling it into the pup's mouth. He took it, his tiny throat working. A profound, primal relief washed through her. He was strong. He would live. The action grounded her. As she cared for him, she studied his face. Now, knowing what to look for, she saw it. The faint, dark sweep of his brows that promised to be bold, not aristocratic like Lucas's. The shape of his ears. And the scent, now that Rylan had named it, she couldn't unscent it. It was wilder, deeper than a pack wolf's. It was the forest at night. It was his, her son, Rylan's son. The storm of emotions was too vast. Betrayal by Lucas. Violation of her own memories. Fear of the massive, scarred rogue who held their lives in his hands. And a terrifying, fragile thread of hope. He hadn't killed them. He'd provided. The fire burned low. She added a log, the simple task anchor. The cave was silent except for the infant's soft breaths and the eternal wind. Then a new sound filtered through, the distant, echoing howl of a wolf, not a pack chorus. A single, powerful call. It was long, low, and carried a complex message of warning and dominion. It was Rylan. He was marking, proclaiming, challenging. An answer came, much farther off. A faint, organized howl from the direction of Silverfang territory. The scouts were there, listening. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the consequence. Rylan was announcing his awareness. The game had begun. It was fully dark when he returned. He entered on 2 feet, a dead hare in one hand, his body dusted with fresh snow. He didn't speak, simply skinned and gutted the animal with efficient, practiced motions and set it to roast on a spit. The smell of cooking meat made Sienna's stomach clench with painful hunger. He finally looked at her. "You're still awake." "I heard the howls," she said. He nodded, turning the spit. "They know you're alive. They know you're here. Lucas will be, disappointed in one outcome, excited for the other." "What do we do?" The "we" slipped out, unbidden. His gaze sharpened on her. "First, you eat, you heal. The pup needs a mother who isn't a ghost." He tore a leg from the hare, the meat steaming, and offered it to her. It was too hot, too rich, but she took it, eating in small, desperate bites. The warmth spread through her, a tangible comfort. "And then?" she asked around the food. "Then you tell me everything," he said, his voice dropping. "Everything Lucas said, every plan you overheard, every weakness of the Silverfang border patrols. You are the weapon he sent. I will learn your specifications." "I'm an Omega. I know nothing of border patrols," she said, a flicker of her old, meek self returning. "You lived there, you saw, you heard. Omegas are invisible. People say things in front of them they wouldn't say elsewhere." He leaned forward, the firelight carving his face into a mask of grim determination. "Did he ever speak of the Eastern Ridge? The old mine shafts?" Sienna's breath hitched. He had. Lucas had muttered about it once, calling it a rotting tooth in their defenses, but too costly to secure properly. She'd been bringing him wine. He hadn't even acknowledged her presence. She met Ryland's intense stare. "Yes." A slow, predatory smile touched his lips, devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a wolf who has caught the scent of weakness. "Good. The weapon has a use after all." The cliffhanger of his declaration hung between them, but a new, more immediate tension suddenly pierced the air. A sound, not the wind. It was the soft, almost imperceptible crunch of snow under a careful footfall. Outside the cave. Rylan was on his feet in a silent instant, a hand raised toward Sienna in a command for absolute silence. His body shifted, not into the full wolf, but into a lethal, ready crouch. The firelight caught the gleam of extended claws. Another crunch. Closer, not a bear, too light, too deliberate. Sienna clutched her son to her chest, her blood turning to ice. Silverfang scouts. Had they dared to penetrate this deep into Ryland's heartland? Ryland's lips pulled back in a soundless snarl. He pointed to the deepest shadows at the back of the cave, his meaning clear. Hide. But it was too late. The frozen ivy curtain was swept aside. Standing in the entrance, coated in frost and panting lightly, was not a Silverfang warrior. It was Cale, Lucas's beta, the one who had dragged her to the border and thrown her out. His golden eyes, cold and calculating, swept the cave, taking in Sienna on the pelts, the newborn, the roasting hare, and finally landing on Rylan. A tense, electric silence stretched for one heartbeat. 2. Cale's mouth curved into a thin, satisfied smile. He didn't look at Sienna. He kept his eyes locked on the rogue alpha. "Lucas sends his regards," Cale said, his voice slick as oil. He wondered if his gift had been delivered safely. Rylan didn't move a muscle, but the air in the cave thickened with the promise of violence. "You've overstepped, Beta." "Have I?" Cale's smile widened. He took a single step inside, his gaze flicking dismissively to Sienna and the child. "I'm just here to collect a report. My alpha is concerned for the welfare of his former Omega. He needs to know the status of his property." Property? The word was a slap. Sienna recoiled. Ryland's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "You have 3 seconds to turn and run. You won't get 4. Cale actually chuckled, but his posture was taut ready. "Still all brute force, Rylan. Lucas anticipated that. He said you'd probably kill me, which is why I didn't come alone. From the darkness outside the cave, a chorus of low, menacing growls erupted. Shadows shifted, revealing the gleaming eyes of at least 4 other wolves, positioned in a semicircle around the entrance. Silverfang warriors. They hadn't just scouted, they had invaded. Rylan was outnumbered, trapped in his own den with a newborn and a weakened Omega. Kale's eyes glittered with triumph. "Now," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper meant to carry. "Let's talk about the terms of surrender. Starting with you, handing over what belongs to Silverfang." His gaze settled squarely on Sienna's son. The silence in the cave was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the soft, sleeping breaths of her son. Kale's ultimatum hung in the air like a blade. Surrender the property of the Silverfang pack. Sienna's arms tightened instinctively around the bundle in her arms. Property, her son, her. Rylan didn't move. He was a statue of coiled fury beside her, his gaze fixed on Kale. The 4 warriors at the cave mouth shifted, their claws scraping on stone. The sound was a promise of violence. "You trespass, Beta." Rylan's voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated in Sienna's bones. It held none of the shock she felt, only a deep, abiding rage. "You bring filth into my den." Kale's smile was a thin, cruel line. "This is no longer just your den, rogue. It's a crime scene. You've stolen pack assets. Alpha Lucas demands their return. The child is of Silverfang blood. The Omega is Silverfang chattel. Hand them over and your execution will be swift." "Fight!" He let the implication settle. The warriors growled in unison, a chorus of threat. They'll kill him, Sienna thought, panic a cold flood in her veins. They'll kill him and take us anyway. Her mind, still fragile from birth and revelation, scrabbled for purchase. Lucas had sent her here to die or to start a war. Kale was here to finish the job. "He's not of Silverfang blood." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Her voice was hoarse, but it cut through the growls. All eyes snapped to her. Kale's smug confidence flickered, replaced by sharp calculation. Rylan went preternaturally still beside her. "What did you say, Omega?" Kale took a step forward. Rylan's arm shot out, barring Sienna slightly behind him. A protective gesture or a possessive one? She couldn't tell. "You heard her," Rylan said, and now a new, terrifying note entered his voice, a kind of savage triumph. "The pup is mine. His blood is mine. Lucas knew it when he cast her out. He sent your Luna's rival, carrying my heir into my territory. Tell me, Beta, does that sound like a man protecting pack assets, or a coward starting a war with a woman's life?" The cave seemed to shrink. Kale's warriors exchanged uncertain glances. This was not in their briefing. They'd come to retrieve a wayward Omega and a bastard pup, not to confront a rogue alpha over a claimed heir. "Lies," Kale spat, but the conviction was weaker. "The Omega is delirious. You've poisoned her mind." "Have I?" Rylan's laugh was short and harsh. "Why would I claim another alpha's leavings? Look at him." He gestured to the sleeping infant. "In a moon, his scent will scream the truth. Lucas couldn't bear the living proof of his cuckoldry, so he threw her to the monster in the woods. He used you, Kale. He used all of you. You're not here on a righteous retrieval. You're here to clean up his mess and die for his pride." What happened next changed everything. Kale's face darkened with fury, but it was the fury of a man realizing he's been played. The political ramifications crashed down. If this was true, Lucas had endangered the pack's warriors for a personal grudge, had exiled a pregnant female under false pretenses, a crime under the old codes. The warriors at his back felt it. Their aggressive stances softened a fraction, their eyes now on their Beta for true guidance. Sienna saw the crack in their unity. It was a sliver, but it was there. Rylan saw it too. He pressed. "You have a choice, Beta," Rylan murmured, his voice dropping into an intimate, deadly register. "You can die here in this cave for a liar's vanity, or you can return to your alpha and ask him, in front of his precious new Luna and his entire pack council, to swear on the moon goddess that the child Sienna bore is his." The air left the cave. It was a masterstroke. A public oath on the goddess was unbreakable. To swear falsely was to invite her wrath, to lose the respect of every wolf who followed you. Lucas, the political creature, would never risk it. Kale was trapped. His mission had just exploded. To attack now was to potentially kill a claimed alpha heir, invoking blood feud laws far older and more brutal than pack law. To retreat was a humiliation. His jaw worked. The alpha's word is law, Kale stated, but it was rote hollow. Then let his word be tested, Rylan challenged. Leave, now, tell Lucas his weapon has been accepted, and that it's now aimed at his throat. For a long, tense moment, Sienna was sure Kale would choose death. His hand twitched toward the dagger at his hip. The firelight gleamed in his hate-filled eyes. Then, with a sound of pure disgust, he took a step back. This isn't over, Rogue. It never is with Silverfang, Rylan replied, his tone dismissive. Get out of my sight! You're fouling the air! Kale turned, a whirl of frost and fury, and stalked toward the entrance. His warriors fell in behind him, their retreat a silent, shameful thing. They melted into the swirling snow beyond the ivy curtain, and the howling wind swallowed the sound of their departure. Silence descended, thicker and more profound than before. Sienna's legs gave out. She sank onto the furs, trembling violently, her son clutched to her chest. The adrenaline crash was a physical sickness. She heard Rylan move, the crunch of his boots on the stone floor as he walked to the cave entrance. He stood there for a full minute, listening, scenting the wind. They're gone, he finally said, his back to her. For now. He believed you, Sienna whispered, stunned. He believed the logic, Rylan corrected, turning. His expression was grim, not victorious. He believes Lucas is capable of the deception. That's enough. It bought us time, not much. He walked to the fire and began adding more wood, his movements efficient, controlled. But Sienna saw the slight tremor in his hands, the raw energy he was forcing back down. He had just faced down 5 Silverfang warriors in his own home and won without a fight. The sheer, audacious power of it left her breathless. They'll be back, she said, the certainty a stone in her gut. With the entire pack, Rylan nodded, poking the flames to life. Lucas can't let this stand. My claim on the boy, my defiance, it's a direct challenge to his authority. He'll spin it. He'll tell the pack I kidnapped you, that I'm making wild claims to justify it. He'll come for war. The fear returned, colder now. What do we do? Rylan looked at her then, his amber eyes reflecting the fire. We use the time Kale just gave us. You told me about the Eastern Ridge, the old mine shafts. A rotting tooth, you said Lucas called it. She nodded, remembering their tense conversation before the howls had interrupted. He complained about it constantly, said it was indefensible, a drain on resources. The patrols there are thin, mostly young warriors looking for an easy duty. A slow, predatory smile touched Rylan's lips. It transformed his scarred face, not into something handsome, but into something fiercely, terrifyingly alive. Good. Then that's where we strike first. Strike, Sienna's heart hammered. Rylan, I can't fight. I have a newborn. I'm an Omega. You're a weapon, he said, his voice low and intent. He came to crouch before her, his gaze holding hers. Lucas sent you to be one. So be it, but you're my weapon now. Your knowledge is the blade. You know the pack's rhythms, its weaknesses, its fears. You know Lucas. You lived beside him. You believed you were his mate. The words were a lash, but they held no cruelty now. Only a brutal, strategic truth. She flinched but didn't look away. I need you to think, Sienna. Not as the Omega they broke, but as the wolf who survived them. The Eastern Ridge. When is the patrol change? What are the signals? Where are the blind spots? Her mind, so long conditioned to submission and silence, struggled to engage. But beneath the fear, a new ember glowed, a spark of anger. Lucas had used her, lied to her, thrown her away. He had tried to use her son as a tool of vengeance. He had sent Kale to drag her back like stolen goods. She closed her eyes, pushing past the pain and exhaustion. She pictured the eastern border, the jagged line of the ridge against the sky, the dark, yawning mouths of the abandoned silver mines. The patrol changes at dusk and dawn, she said, her voice growing stronger. The signal is a triple owl hoot, echoed back, but the southernmost post, near the collapsed shaft, the echo is weird. The rock absorbs it. Sometimes the relief patrol has to get closer to be sure. There's a 10-minute window where they're visible in the clearing below. Rylan's eyes gleamed. Go on. The warriors hate it. They say it's haunted. Wolves go missing near the deepest shaft. Lucas said it was superstition, but he never stayed there after dark himself. She opened her eyes, meeting his intense stare. It's not haunted. It's unstable. There are old tunnels that cross under the border. I heard the elders whisper about it once. A secret from when the mines were active. If only I had known the value of those frightened whispers back then. I'd stored them away as trivial pack gossip. Now, they felt like gold. Rylan let out a soft, appreciative breath. Tunnels, that's more than a rotting tooth, that's a hollow vein. He stood, pacing before the fire, his mind racing ahead. We won't face them head-on. We can't. But we can make their territory a nightmare. We can use their fear and their alpha's arrogance against them. How? Sienna asked, a strange, foreign feeling stirring in her chest. It wasn't just fear. It was anticipation. We remind them what lives in the Blackwood, he said, stopping his pace. You need to heal. The pup needs to grow stronger. We have a moon, maybe less. In that time you will learn, you will get strong, and you will tell me everything. He moved to a shadowed recess of the cave and began pulling out items. Coils of sturdy rope, a worn leather satchel, small, sharp tools. We need supplies they can't trace. Medicine for you and the boy. Food that will last. You're going out there, now, after Cale just left. The Blackwood is my territory, he said, not looking up as he packed. I know where they'll run, where they'll hide, where they'll camp for the night. They're scared and angry. They won't linger. And they won't expect me to move so soon. He slung the pack over his shoulder and approached her. For a moment, he simply looked at her son, his expression unreadable. Then his gaze lifted to hers. The cave is secure. The entrance is hidden. The fire will burn for hours. Do not leave for any reason. Do not answer any call. I will be back by first light. He was leaving her, alone, in the heart of the frozen wilderness. The panic surged again. Rylan. He paused, his hand on the ivy curtain. Is it true? The question burst from her, the one that had been screaming in her soul since his revelation. About us, 2 years ago. His broad shoulders tensed. He didn't turn. The Stone River gathering, the night of the full moon. You were there with Silverfang. You were luminous. The words were grudging, ripped from him. I was not in a good place. We spoke. It was more than speaking. Lucas found us. He was furious. The next day, you didn't remember me. I thought he just warned you away. Now I know he did more. He finally glanced back, his profile harsh against the dark green of the ivy. The bond you felt with him, was it real? Or was it something he made you feel to cover the scent of another's claim? It was the final, devastating piece. The mate bond with Lucas had always felt intense, but somehow external. Like a collar, not a tether. She had blamed her omega nature, her own unworthiness. Now she wondered if it was a gilded cage, constructed by an alpha's will to hide a truth he found inconvenient. She had no answer. Her world was lies. Rylan took her silence for what it was. The past is a weapon too, Sienna, but right now the future is a knife at our throats. Get strong. He parted the curtain and was gone, swallowed by the blizzard's roar. Alone, Sienna held her son, their son, and listened to the storm. The cave, once a terrifying prison, now felt like a fragile sanctuary. The fire popped. Her mind replayed Cale's retreat, Rylan's cunning, the map of weaknesses unfolding in her head. She was not just a survivor anymore. She was a weapon being sharpened. And as the wind screamed outside, a new sound began to weave itself into the gale, distant, echoing, and full of malice. It was the sound of howls, but not from Silverfang. These were raw, untethered, and coming from the deep, desolate mountains beyond the Blackwood. They were answering the tension in the air, the scent of conflict. Rylan was their king, and his war was beginning. The howls grew closer, and Sienna realized with a chill that pierced deeper than the cave's cold. The door to the monster's den was open, and she was locked inside with all the terrible, waiting things he commanded. The howls from the deep mountains faded into the wind, but their promise hung in the cave's cold air like a blade. The rogues were answering. Sienna clutched her sleeping son, the sound both a threat and a strange, savage comfort. Rylan was gone, a phantom swallowed by the blizzard, and she was alone with the echo of his declaration. You are my weapon now. What happened next would change everything. She just didn't know it yet. time warped in the cave's amber gloom. The fire, diligently fed from Ryland's stacked wood, popped and hissed. Her body ached with a deep, systemic exhaustion, but her mind raced, tracing the new, terrible map of her life. Lucas's face, once beloved, now seemed a mask of cold calculation. Every tender moment, every whispered promise of the mate bond, had it all been a lie? A performance? The thought was a sickness in her gut. She looked down at her son's tiny, perfect features, searching for Rylan in them. The strong line of the brow, the stubborn set of the jaw even in sleep, it was there. The truth was in the blood, and it had been used as a trigger for war. A new sound cut through the wind's moan. Not a howl, a scrape, then a soft, distinct thud against the frozen ivy curtain. Sienna froze, her breath catching. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum. Cale, he's come back. He'd reconsidered, decided to finish the job. She scrambled silently, clutching her pup to her chest, her eyes darting for a weapon. A heavy, fire-blackened stone from the pit's edge was all she could see. The ivy rustled. A low, pained whine seeped through. It wasn't a warrior's sound. It was an animal's sound, of suffering. Cautiously, every sense screaming, Sienna crept forward. She used the stone to nudge aside a section of the frozen foliage, peering out into the white hell of the blizzard. A dark shape, half buried in a drift just outside the cave mouth, shuddered. It was a wolf. Massive, but not Silverfang. Its fur was a matted, unusual mix of charcoal and rust, and a deep, gouging wound ran across its haunch, staining the snow beneath it black. A rogue, one of Ryland's. It lifted its head, golden eyes glazed with pain, and looked directly at her. There was no aggression in its gaze, only a desperate, fading intelligence. It tried to rise, failed, and collapsed with another whimper. If only I had known what this single act of mercy would set in motion. This wasn't Cale. This was a message. A casualty. The war wasn't coming, it had already begun, and its first wounded had crawled to her doorstep. Sienna acted on an instinct deeper than pack loyalty, deeper than fear. She was an Omega, a caretaker. She dropped the stone. "Easy," she whispered, her voice swallowed by the wind. "Easy, I'll help." Dragging the heavy, unconscious wolf into the cave was a feat that tore at her already ravaged muscles. She grunted, sweat beading on her brow despite the cold. Her son wrapped securely and laid on pelts nearby. Finally, she got the beast near the fire. The wound was bad, claw marks, deep and vicious. Bear, or another wolf. She set to work, using clean snow to wash the gore, then tearing a strip from the edge of a pelt to bind it as best she could. As she worked, her fingers brushed against a crude leather cord around the wolf's neck. Tied to it was a small, carved piece of bone, a token, a marker. The wolf shifted, its body trembling. In a shimmer of painful light and contracting muscle, it began to change. The process was slower, more labored than any shift she'd witnessed in Silverfang. Bones cracked and reknitted with sickening wet sounds. Fur receded into pale, scarred skin. Within a minute, a man lay where the wolf had been, unconscious, breathing in ragged gasps. He was lean and whipcord strong, covered in old scars and new blood, the bone token now resting against his collarbone. Sienna covered him with a pelt, her mind reeling. She had never tended a rogue. They were monsters in stories. But this man, maybe a few years older than her, just looked broken, and loyal enough to wear his leader's mark. He came to with a sudden, sharp intake of breath, his hand flying to his wound. His eyes, still that same lupin gold, snapped open and locked onto her. Instantly, he tried to surge up, a snarl forming on his lips. "Don't," Sienna said, holding her hands up, placing herself between him and her son. "You're in Ryland's cave, you're safe." The name was a key. The tension bled from him, replaced by acute assessment. His gaze darted from her face to the sleeping pup, to the bound wound on his leg, then back to her. "The Omega," he rasped, his voice raw. "You're her." "I'm Sienna." He gave a slow, pained nod. "Jax." He tried to sit up properly, his face paling. "The Alpha, he found you." "He did. He's gone to gather supplies and mobilize." A grim, satisfied smile touched Jax's bloodless lips. "Good. The mountain clans are stirring. The Silverfang bastards they're probing, testing the borders." He coughed, wincing. "I was on scout duty. east of the Stone River, ran into a patrol, not border guards, Kale's personal hunters. They were deep, too deep, looking for something or someone. Sienna's blood ran cold. For me. Likely. Jax's golden eyes studied her with unnerving intensity. He left you here alone, unprotected. He said the cave was safe. Jax barked a short, pained laugh. Nothing did, until you, now this is the eye of the storm. He struggled, gripping her arm. His hand was calloused and strong. Listen, Kale's retreat was a tactic. He's not done. He can't be. Lucas will have his head if he returns empty-handed. They'll come again, and not to talk. They'll come to burn this place to the ground and take what's theirs. We're not theirs, Sienna said, the words feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. They think you are. Jax's gaze was urgent. You need to be gone before Rylan returns. There's a place, deeper in the Blackwood, a network of old, ice-locked tunnels beneath the crags. We use it when the packs get bold. I can take you. The offer hung in the air. To leave this relative sanctuary, to venture back into the blizzard with a newborn and a wounded rogue. It was madness. But the scrape at the curtain, the proximity of Kale's hunters, Jax was right. The cave was a known location now. It was a target. Why would you help me? Sienna asked, her Omega senses reaching out, feeling for deceit. She found only pain, loyalty, and a simmering, ancient hatred for Silverfang. Jax's expression hardened. Because you carry our Alpha's pup, that makes you our pack. And because Lucas Blackwood stole something from Rylan a long time ago, this is just the reckoning. He shifted, his face tightening. We need to move, now, before the storm eases and their tracking becomes easier. The decision crystallized. Staying was passive, a waiting game. Leaving was action. It was choosing a side definitively. She looked at her son, his father's son. All right, she said, her voice steady. Show me. They moved with a desperate, silent urgency. Sienna fashioned a sling from the softest pelt, securing her son against her chest, beneath her layers. Jax, despite his injury, moved with a predator's grace, his senses tuned to the forest. He led her out the back of the cave, through a narrow, almost invisible fissure in the rock she hadn't noticed, which opened onto a steep, snow-choked ravine. The blizzard was a living entity here, howling through the pines, stripping the world to shades of white and gray. They moved downhill, the wind at their backs, Jax setting a punishing pace. Sienna's legs burned, her lungs seared with each frigid breath, but she pushed on, driven by a new, fierce instinct to protect. After an hour of brutal travel, Jax halted behind a colossal, fallen cedar. He pointed ahead through the swirling snow. There, the entrance is behind that curtain of icefall. It's treacherous to reach. What Sienna saw made her heart sink. A sheer rock face rose before them, adorned with a frozen waterfall that gleamed like a deadly curtain of glass. At its base was a jagged, dark opening, partially obscured by colossal icicles. We have to climb that, she whispered, despair creeping in. There's a path, of sorts. Jax's confidence sounded thin. He took a step forward, then froze. His head cocked, every line of his body going taut. Sienna heard it too, a sound that wasn't the wind, the crunch of snow under multiple heavy feet, to their left. Upwind. Jax shoved her hard, pushing her into the deep shadow of the cedar log. Down, don't move. Don't breathe. He didn't have to tell her twice. She flattened herself into the snow, curling around her son, making herself small. Peering through a gap in the rotten wood, she saw them. 4 massive wolves emerged from the white like ghosts. Silverfang warriors. They moved in a tight, professional formation, noses to the ground, then lifting to test the air. They were on their trail. How? The storm should have covered their scent. Then she saw the lead wolf. It was larger than the others, its fur tipped with gray. Beta Kale. He shifted mid-stride, his naked human form steaming in the cold. He knelt, brushing snow away, examining the ground where she and Jax had stood just minutes before. They're here, Kale's voice cut through the storm, cold and sure. The rogue is wounded. He's slowing her down. Fan out. The Omega is priority. Take her alive. Kill the rogue. The wolves split up with silent efficiency. From her hiding place, Sienna saw Jax. He hadn't run. He had shifted back into his wolf form, his wounded leg held awkwardly. He was positioning himself not to flee, but to stand his ground between the approaching hunters and her hiding place. He was going to fight, to die, to buy her seconds. No, the thought was a fire in her veins. She was not a passive prize to be fought over. She was the weapon. As Cale turned, his back to the frozen waterfall, a plan, wild and desperate, formed in her mind. She remembered the eastern ridge, the rotting tooth, Lucas's arrogance in pointing out a weakness he never thought an enemy could exploit. This icefall, it was a weakness in the Blackwood's defense, and she knew how to use it. Just as the nearest Silverfang wolf, fangs bared, began to stalk toward Jax's exposed position, Sienna moved. She didn't attack the wolf. She didn't scream. She stood up from behind the log, making herself fully visible. She looked directly at Cale, who spun, surprise flashing across his harsh features. Then, with every ounce of strength she had, Sienna slammed her foot down onto a long, thick, dead branch hidden beneath the snow. The crack was explosive, echoing off the rock face like a gunshot. For a frozen second, nothing happened. Cale stared at her, confusion turning to dawning comprehension. Then, with a deep, groaning shudder, the entire curtain of the frozen waterfall began to vibrate. The sonic shockwave, amplified by the ice, had done its work. A web of fractures raced up the gleaming facade. "You foolish," Cale began. The world dissolved into sound and fury. The icefall collapsed, not in chunks, but in a roaring, catastrophic avalanche of solid ice the size of boulders. It crashed down between Sienna and the Silverfang warriors, a sudden, impassable, deadly wall of white and blue. The ground shook. A wave of displaced snow and wind knocked Sienna back against the log. When the deafening roar subsided, replaced by the tinkle of settling ice shards, the scene was transformed. A jagged, 10-foot-high berm of shattered ice completely blocked the path. From the other side, she heard a muffled, furious howl, Cale. But there was no way through. Not quickly. Jax limped to her side, his wolf's eyes wide with shock and something like respect. He shifted back, gripping his bleeding leg. "Moon Goddess, you brought it down." Sienna's heart was pounding, adrenaline singing in her ears. She had done that. She had changed the battlefield, but her triumph was short-lived. From the top of the ravine, a new sound reached them. Not a howl of frustration, but a clear, commanding, and horrifyingly familiar horn blast. It was a Silverfang rally cry, and it was close, too close. Cale hadn't brought just one patrol, he'd brought a small army. And they were now descending the ridge above them, cutting off their retreat to the tunnels. They were trapped between the ice wall and the advancing pack. Jax met her eyes, his face grim. They were the bait, were the trap. Sienna clutched her son, looking from the impassable ice to the shadows moving swiftly through the trees above. They were surrounded. The strategic tunnels were now a death sentence, a bottleneck they'd be driven into. Out of the blizzard above, a figure emerged at the ravine's edge, looking down at them. It was Cale, having circled at a run. His voice, laced with venomous triumph, carried down to them. "The Omega comes home. The rogue dies. That is the Alpha's will." He raised a hand. Behind him, a line of archers stepped forward, not with ordinary arrows, but with shafts wrapped in oily rags. Torches were touched to them. Flames bloomed against the gray sky, reflecting in the ice. They weren't just going to kill Jax. They were going to burn him alive where he stood. And Sienna knew, with a certainty that turned her bones to ice, that Rylan would never reach them in time. The hiss of the lit arrowheads was the only sound in the sudden, terrible silence. Cale's smile was a knife slash of triumph. Sienna's arms tightened around her son, her body a futile shield against the coming fire. This is it, she thought, a strange calm descending. After everything, it ends here in the snow. "Take the Omega alive," Cale commanded, his voice cutting through the wind. "Kill the rogue." The archers drew back their bowstrings. The creak of the wood was a death knell. What happened next was not the roar of Rylan, nor a miraculous escape. It was a shift in the very air. A low, resonant thrum vibrated up through the soles of Sienna's boots, a sensation more felt than heard. The snow on the pine boughs around them began to shiver, sending down fine, glittering powder. The archers on the ridge above faltered, their aim wavering as they glanced at one another. Cale's smirk vanished. "Loose your arrows," he snarled, but it was too late. From the dense, blizzard-shrouded woods behind Kale's position, a chorus of howls erupted. These were not the disciplined, unified calls of a pack like Silverfang. These were wild, discordant, and terrifying, a symphony of chaos that spoke of jagged peaks and deep, lawless shadows. They came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the crags until it sounded like an army was materializing from the storm itself. The rogues of the deep mountains had answered their king's call. Kale spun, his composure cracking. Form a perimeter, face his hunters scrambled, turning their fire arrows toward the new threat. In that moment of fractured attention, Jax moved. Wounded but fueled by a desperate loyalty, he shoved Sienna hard toward the collapsed icefall. "The tunnel! Go! He comes!" Sienna stumbled, then ran. She didn't look back. She plunged into the jagged, unstable maze of the icefall, the world narrowing to the frantic need to put solid ice between her child and the arrows. The sounds of battle broke out behind her. Snarls, the thwip of arrows, the wet crunch of impact, and those savage, endless howls. The ice tunnel was a blue, trembling throat. Light from the outside, stained orange by fire, flickered through the frozen walls. She could see distorted shadows moving beyond the ice, the clash of bodies. A shadow with Kale's broad shoulders was locked with a larger, more feral shape. Rylan. His roar, when it came, was not entirely wolf nor man. It was the sound of the mountain itself splitting open. It shook the tunnel, and a web of cracks skittered across the ceiling above her. Sienna gasped, pressing herself and her whimpering son against the wall. "You trespass in my woods, Beta," Rylan's voice boomed, muffled but terrifyingly clear. "You hunt what is mine." "She is Silverfang property, rogue," Kale shot back, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. There was a strain, the grunt of physical effort. "She was your alpha's discarded tool. Now she is my weapon, and you are the messenger. Tell Lucas his gambit failed. The war he wanted is here." The conflict outside grew more violent. Sienna knew she couldn't stay here. The tunnel could collapse. Gritting her teeth, she pushed deeper into the labyrinth, following the faint, cold draft that promised an exit. Her mind raced. Rylan's weapon. The term should have chilled her. Instead, it sparked a defiant heat in her chest. Lucas had made her a pawn. Rylan saw her as a blade. It was, in its own brutal way, an acknowledgement of her worth. After what felt like an eternity of groping through semi-darkness, the tunnel opened into a wider cavern. The air was still freezing, but the howling wind was gone, replaced by the drip of meltwater. A single shaft of gray stormlight pierced from a high crevice. And there, standing in that pale beam, was Rylan. He was breathing heavily, his powerful chest rising and falling. Fresh blood, not his own, Sienna sensed, spattered his arms and the worn leather of his tunic. A long, shallow gash marked his cheekbone. His eyes, those glacial blue eyes, found hers immediately, then dropped to the bundle in her arms. The intensity in them didn't soften, but it shifted. "Jax," Sienna asked, her voice a rasp. "Alive, wounded worse, but my wolves have him." Rylan took a step closer, his gaze scanning her for injury. Kale retreated, for now. He took losses. The message was delivered. He stopped a few feet away. The silence between them was thick with everything unsaid. The battle outside, his claim, her flight, the child whose paternity now hung between them like a third presence. "You knew," Sienna whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "At the Stone River. You knew it was me that night." Rylan's jaw tightened. "Not then. The gathering was a chaos of sense and politics. I knew a Silverfang Omega had been put in my path. A pretty, dizzy thing who smelled of fear and forced wine." His voice was gravel. "I knew Lucas was trying to provoke me. I didn't know it was you until I caught your scent in my woods, heavy with birth blood and my own son." The confirmation, direct and unvarnished, stole her breath. "He erased my memory of it. Wolfsbane and mind games, a specialty of his," Rylan spat. He finally closed the distance, not touching her, but looking down at the sleeping infant. "He used you to plant a seed of conflict. Exiling you here while you carried my heir wasn't just cruelty. It was a declaration. He was saying he could take what was mine and discard it on my doorstep. He expected me to kill you in a rage, or for you to die in the Blackwood. Either would have given him a righteous cause to rally the packs and cleanse the mountains of rogues." Sienna felt the truth of it, cold and precise, slotting into place. Her entire pregnancy, her love, her hope, all of it had been a stage set for a war. The pain was so vast it felt hollow. "And you, what do you expect of me?" she asked, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a rising, furious energy. Ryland's eyes met hers. "I expect you to be the flaw in his armor. You know his mind. You know the pack's weaknesses. You are the living proof of his deceit." He reached out, a single, calloused finger brushing the edge of the swaddling fur around her son. A gesture so slight, yet it held a possessiveness that shook her. "This child is mine. That makes you mine to protect, and to use." It should have felt like another cage. Instead, it felt like a purpose. A dark, dangerous purpose, but her own. She was not Silverfang's Omega, not anymore. She was the rogue Alpha's weapon. "They'll be back," she said, the Omega's instinct to warn her Alpha, her new Alpha, kicking in. "Cale won't return without a larger force. He saw the tunnels. He knows we're mobilizing." Rylan gave a slow, predatory nod. "He does, which means we move first." He turned, gesturing for her to follow him deeper into the cavern system. "The main enclave is a half-day's journey through the mountains. We need to get you and the pup to safety." "Safety," Sienna followed, her legs aching but moving. "Or a strategic position." A grim, approving smirk touched his bloodied mouth. "Both." The journey was a brutal test. They navigated narrow, icy passages that opened into vast, echoing subterranean halls where rogue scouts melted from the shadows to report in hushed, respectful tones to Rylan. Sienna saw them now, not as monstrous outcasts, but as a ragged, fierce people. Men and women with hard eyes and the lean muscle of survivors. They looked at Rylan with a blend of fear and fanatical loyalty. And they looked at her with open, wary curiosity. She heard the whispers carried on the cold drafts. "The Silverfang Omega. He claims the pup. Is it true? The Alpha's own." Rylan ignored them, his focus absolute. He set a punishing pace, but always checked that she was keeping up, his hand sometimes appearing to steady her on a slippery ledge. He didn't speak, but his presence was a constant, charged force. Finally, they emerged from a cave mouth high on a mountainside. The view stole what little breath Sienna had left. Below them lay a hidden valley, sheltered from the worst of the blizzard. Smoke rose from dozens of crude stone shelters and tents nestled among the pines. Fires burned. Wolves in both forms patrolled the high ridges. This was no scattered band of outcasts. This was a fortress. "The deep mountain enclave," Rylan said, his voice a low rumble beside her. As they descended a treacherous switchback path, figures emerged to meet them. A tall, gaunt woman with gray streaking her black hair and eyes as sharp as flint stepped forward. She looked Sienna up and down, her nostrils flaring as she scented the baby. "Rylan," the woman said, her voice like grinding stones. "You bring a storm with you." "I bring the reason for the storm, Mara," Rylan replied. "This is Sienna and my son. They are under my protection. See that the healer tends to her. She is exhausted." Mara's flinty eyes didn't waver. "And the Silverfang pack. Cale's hunters licked their wounds and ran, but they've left scouts like ticks all along the eastern tree line. They're watching." "Let them watch," Rylan said, but he was looking at Sienna. "We have what they don't. We have the truth. And we have the weapon that knows where their armor rusts." He turned to go, to plunge back into the planning and the patrols, but Sienna found her voice. "Rylan," he paused. "The eastern ridge, the old mine shafts," she said, the words feeling like a betrayal of the home she'd once loved. "Lucas always said they were a rotting tooth. He planned to seal them, but he never did. Too costly. Too much effort for a theoretical threat from the mountains." Rylan's gaze ignited with a fierce, strategic light. It was the look of an alpha seeing a path to victory. He gave a single, decisive nod. "Mara, get her settled. Then bring the war leaders to the council fire." He strode away, leaving Sienna with the stern Mara. As she was led toward a small, relatively clean stone hut near a thermal vent, the reality of her choice settled on her. She had just given Rylan the key to invading Silverfang territory. She had committed to the war. Inside the hut, a fire was lit, and pelts were piled for a bed. A silent older woman brought her a bowl of hearty stew. As Sienna ate, feeding her son, she listened to the sounds of the Enclave gearing for battle. The clang of metal being worked, the low murmur of plans, the distant, vigilant howls from the ridges. Mara stood in the doorway, watching her. "You understand what you have done, girl. You have lit the fuse." Sienna looked up, meeting the woman's hard stare. For the first time since her exile, she didn't feel like a girl. She felt like a woman who had finally grasped the hilt of her own fate, even if the blade was drenched in blood. "Lucas lit it," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm just pointing the flame." Mara considered her for a long moment, then gave a slight, grudging nod before leaving her alone. The exhaustion hit her then, a tidal wave that pulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep beside the fire, her son safe against her heart. She didn't know how long she slept, but she was awakened by a new sound. Not a howl, not a battle cry. It was the sound of a single wolf, running at full, desperate speed through the enclave, yipping a high-pitched alarm. It was followed by Ryland's roar of fury, a sound that shook the very stones of her hut. Sienna was on her feet in an instant, clutching her son. She threw open the hide door. Chaos. Rogues were rushing toward the valley's entrance. In the center of the clearing, Ryland stood over the body of the scout, the one who had been watching the eastern tree line. The wolf was shifting back into human form in his death throes, a silver-fang arrow protruding from his throat. Mara was at Ryland's side, her face grim. "A message," she hissed. Ryland pulled the arrow free. Tied just below the fletching was not a note, but a small, familiar token. A polished moonstone pendant on a broken leather cord. Sienna's hand flew to her own throat, where an identical pendant had once rested. Lucas had given it to her. She'd lost it the night of the gathering at the Stone River. Ryland held the blood-smeared moonstone up, his face a mask of apocalyptic rage. He turned, and his eyes found Sienna across the distance. In them, she saw not accusation, but a terrible, dawning understanding. The scout's dying words bubbled from his lips, a final, gasped report to his alpha that changed everything. He has the seer, the old one from the western crags. He says the child is not the only weapon." Ryland crushed the moonstone in his fist. If only Sienna had known the true depth of Lucas's plan. The memory he stole wasn't the only thing he had taken from her that night at the Stone River. And the war was no longer just about territory or vengeance. It was about a secret, buried in her own mind, that Lucas had just unleashed. The bloodied moonstone pendant lay in Ryland's palm, a tiny, accusing star against his scarred skin. Not the only weapon. The seer's words, delivered with a scout's dying breath, hung in the frozen air of the enclave like a physical shroud. Sienna felt the ground tilt. Her child, her son, was a target, and she was something else. A secret. A hidden blade Lucas had somehow known about, even when she did not. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant, rhythmic thump of a war drum from the lower guard post. Ryland's fingers closed over the pendant, his knuckles white. He looked from the dead scout at his feet to Sienna's pale face, his gaze a physical weight. "Mara," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Sienna's bones. "See to him. Give him the rights of the mountain." The tall woman nodded, her flinty eyes lingering on Sienna for a heartbeat too long before she gestured to two others. They lifted the fallen scout with a solemn care that spoke of a deep, ingrained pack loyalty Sienna had never known in Silverfang. "With me," Ryland commanded, turning on his heel. He didn't specify who, but his path led directly toward the largest of the stone shelters, the one built into the cliff face behind the council fire. Sienna, clutching her sleeping son tighter, had no choice but to follow. Jax fell into step beside her, a silent, limping shadow. The shelter was Spartan but solid. A central fire pit glowed with coals, throwing long, dancing shadows on walls hung with maps scratched on hide and shelves holding simple supplies. The air smelled of smoke, pine, and cold stone. Ryland tossed the pendant onto a rough-hewn table. It skittered and lay still, the moonstone gleaming dully. "Sit," he said, not looking at her as he poured water from a skin into a crude clay cup and handed it to her. It was an order, but the gesture was practical. She drank, the cold water shocking her back into her body. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Not the only weapon," What am I? Rylan leaned against the table, crossing his massive arms. The firelight carved the scars on his face into deep crevices. That is the question Lucas wants me to ask. He sends a piece of your past, drenched in blood, with a riddle. He wants us unsteady. He wants you looking inward, questioning your own skin instead of looking outward at his forces. But the seer, Jax began, his voice rough from pain. Was captured, Rylan finished, his eyes never leaving Sienna's. A seer from the western crags sees threads of fate, not battle plans. Lucas wouldn't waste a captive on vague prophecies unless he believed it would achieve something. Unless he knew it would unravel something. He pushed off the table and took a step toward her. You told me you felt a mate bond with Lucas. The sudden shift made her flinch. I did. It felt real. Until he cast me out. A true mate bond is a recognition of souls. It cannot be faked, Rylan stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. But it can be obscured, muffled, or imitated by a powerful enough will. A cold dread, deeper than the mountain winter, seeped into her. What are you saying? He picked up the pendant again. This, from the gathering at Stone River, the night you don't remember, the night our son was conceived. His gaze was relentless. You told me you drank spiced wine, felt dizzy, and Lucas took you to your tent. You woke with a headache and a vague sense of shame, believing you'd merely overindulged. Sienna nodded, the old humiliation fresh. Yes, what if it wasn't the wine? Rylan's voice dropped, a confidential growl that filled the small space. What if it was something else? A herb, a powder, something to cloud your mind, your senses, to make you suggestible, to make you believe a lie. The pieces, jagged and horrifying, began to click together. The unshakable, glowing certainty of the bond she'd felt with Lucas afterwards. Its sudden, total extinction when he exiled her. The way he'd looked at her with cold calculation, not heartbreak. He fabricated the bond. The words tasted like ash. He manipulated your perception of it, Rylan corrected, a feral anger simmering beneath his calm. He used you, and he used that night. He needed you to be with me, but to believe you were with him. He needed a child of my bloodline, but raised as his heir under his control. A living weapon against me, held in his own hands. Your exile wasn't just a provocation, Sienna. It was a recall. He sent his failed weapon back to its maker, hoping it would detonate. The shelter walls seemed to press in. Her son, her beautiful boy, was a pawn in a scheme that began before his conception, and she had been the unwitting vessel. The shock was so profound it felt like a physical blow. She swayed and Jack steadied her with a hand on her elbow. But why? She breathed. Why go to such lengths? Why me? Rylan's jaw tightened. That is the second question, the seer's riddle, not the only weapon. He moved closer until she could feel the heat radiating from him. Think, beyond the bond, beyond Lucas, your parents, your lineage in Silverfang. What were you told? Sienna's mind raced, scrambling over memories of her life as an Omega. The obscurity, the quiet neglect. Nothing, I was a nobody, low-ranking. My parents died in a border skirmish when I was a child. I was raised in the communal dens. There was nothing special. A nobody who an alpha would meticulously groom, manipulate, and use as the centerpiece of a years-long strategy. Rylan's skepticism was a blade. What were their names? Your parents? Corin and Liana, she said automatically. Common names. She remembered little of them, a scent of cedar, a soft laugh. Rylan went very still. The name Corin seemed to hang in the air. He exchanged a sharp, loaded glance with Jax, whose eyes had widened. What? Sienna demanded, fear sharpening her voice. What is it? Rylan didn't answer immediately. He walked to one of the hide maps on the wall, his finger tracing a line near the western crags, far beyond Silverfang or Blackwood territory. Corin, he said slowly, as if testing the weight of the word. 20 years ago, a warrior by that name fled the Blood Moon Pack with his human-born mate, Liana. They were hunted. It was said they were killed, their half-breed child with them. The Blood Moon Alpha wanted them eradicated, the warrior for betrayal, the human-born for her potential. Sienna's blood turned to ice. Potential. Human-born wolves, those not born of two werewolf parents, are rare. Their connection to the moon can be unstable, unpredictable. He finally looked back at her, his eyes blazing with a new, fierce intensity. In some, it is merely weak. In others, it is said they can channel power in ways purebloods cannot. They can be conduits, amplifiers, or, in the eyes of a paranoid alpha, dangerous aberrations to be culled. A conduit, an amplifier, not the only weapon. The truth crashed over her with the force of an avalanche, her mother, her human-born mother. The secret wasn't about her son. It was about her very blood. Lucas knew, she whispered, horror dawning. He knew what I was. He hid me among the Omegas. He kept me close. He made me love him so I would never question, never look too deep at my own heritage. The humiliation burned hotter now, fused with a rage so pure it stole her breath. And when he couldn't use me as he planned, when his political marriage made my presence inconvenient, he sent me to you. Not just to start a war. To give you a weapon you wouldn't know how to wield. Or to make me a bomb in your territory. Rylan gave a slow, grim nod. Now you see the board. The sound of hurried footsteps outside broke the terrible clarity. Mara pushed through the hide curtain without ceremony. Alpha, the scouts from the Eastern Watch, they've returned. Rylan's posture shifted instantly from revelation to readiness. Report. A younger wolf, coated in frost, entered, breathing hard. The Silverfangs, they're not just probing, they're moving. A full contingent, at least 30 strong, led by Beta Kale himself. They're using the old lumber trails, but their path, Alpha, they're heading straight for the eastern ridge, for the mine shafts. Sienna's head snapped up. The intelligence she had given. The weak point. Lucas was acting on it with terrifying speed. He wasn't waiting for a provocation. He was using the provocation he'd created to launch his attack. Rylan's smile was a terrifying sight, all sharp canines and cold promise. He took the bait. He's committing his forces to the rotten tooth. He looked at Sienna, and in his eyes she saw no accusation for the trap potentially sprung, only a fierce, approving calculation. You see, your value is not a secret to be feared. It is a key. You gave him the lock, and he is marching his army right into it. He strode to the entrance, throwing the curtain aside. The cold wind rushed in. Jax, you stay, guard her with your life. Mara, sound the assembly. War leaders to the council fire. Now. He paused, his gaze sweeping back to Sienna. You will come, you will listen, you will see what your knowledge buys. The enclave erupted into controlled chaos. The single war drum was joined by 2 others, their deep, resonant thump-thump-thump vibrating up through the stone floor. Shadows of wolves shifted and ran outside. Sienna, her mind reeling from the dual revelations of her poisoned past and the imminent battle, followed Rylan back into the night, Jax a steadfast presence at her side. The council fire was now a roaring blaze, surrounded by a ring of grim-faced men and women, Rylan's war leaders. They were a hard-bitten group, scarred and silent, their eyes reflecting the flames. They looked at Sienna with open curiosity now, no longer just as a refugee, but as the source of the intelligence that had drawn the enemy into position. Rylan stood before the fire, its light making him look like a creature forged from the mountain itself. Silverfang moves on the eastern ridge. They think they've found a back door. They are wrong. His voice carried effortlessly over the wind and the drums. We will not meet them at the mine shafts. We will let them enter the labyrinth. A grizzled older man with a missing ear spoke up. The lower tunnels are unstable, Alpha. A cave-in could trap our own. We won't be in them, Rylan said, his plan unfolding with brutal simplicity. We'll be above, on the ridge. When half their force is inside, we collapse the easternmost entrance. We seal them in the dark. The rest, stranded outside, will be caught between the ridge and our archers in the pines. He turned his head, his eyes finding Sienna in the circle. They will be disoriented, separated, their chain of command broken. It was a devastating strategy, one that used the terrain as a slaughterhouse. Sienna thought of Kale, his cold efficiency. She thought of the warriors who might just be following orders. A pang of something not pity but a grim acknowledgement shot through her. The Beta Kale, she heard herself say. All eyes turned to her. He's cautious. He won't lead from the front. He'll be at the rear of the main group directing. If you want to sever the head, don't look for the vanguard. Look for the wolf giving signals from the back. A slow smile spread across the face of the one-eared war leader. Useful. Rylan gave a single, approving nod. Then we target the rear. We cut the thread and the whole weave unravels. He began issuing rapid, specific orders, groups to the ridge, archers to the pine stands, scouts to monitor the tunnel vibrations. The enclave became a machine of war, each part moving with purpose. As the leaders dispersed to gather their units, Rylan approached Sienna. The frenzy of planning fell away, leaving a pocket of tense quiet around them. "You will remain here, with Mara and the healers," he stated. "Jax will command the guard post at the enclave entrance." It was the logical, safe order, but it felt like a cage. The anticipation that had begun to burn in her chest now flared into something hotter. She was not just a key, she was a part of this. She had set the board. "No," she said, the word clear and firm. Rylan's eyes narrowed. "This is not a negotiation." "You called me your weapon," she fired back, holding his gaze. "A weapon left on the shelf is useless. I know the Silverfang's signals. I know Kale's patterns. I can identify the ranking warriors by their markings. I am not a warrior, but I am not helpless. Let me go to the ridge. Let me be your eyes." He studied her, his expression unreadable. The wind whipped her hair around her face. She didn't blink. She let him see the fury, the resolve, the desperate need to be more than a pawn, more than a secret. What happened next changed everything. He reached out, not with gentleness, but with a decisive grip, his hand closing around the back of her neck. It was an alpha's hold, possessive and dominant, but in it she felt a terrifying trust. "You will stay at my side. You will not engage. You will observe and you will tell me what you see. One step beyond my order, and I will carry you back here myself." It was a concession, a massive one. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Agreed." He released her and turned, his voice a command that brooked no dissent. "Jax, a fur cloak and a blade for her. We move in 5 minutes." The journey to the eastern ridge was a brutal, silent trek through moonlit snow and shadowed pine. Rylan moved like a ghost ahead of her, his large form making no sound. Sienna, bundled in a heavy wolf pelt cloak, a simple but sharp dagger strapped to her thigh, struggled to keep up, her body still aching from childbirth. But the cold fire in her veins fueled her. They reached the windswept ridge, overlooking the labyrinth of old mine entrances, just as the first sliver of dawn bleached the eastern sky. Below, the forest was a sea of darkness. But there, a glint of metal, the faintest disturbance in the snow. The Silverfang force was a dark serpent coiling through the trees, heading directly for the gaping maw of the main mine entrance. Rylan's warriors were already in position, invisible in the rocks and trees. The tension was a wire stretched to breaking. Sienna crouched beside Rylan behind an outcrop of rock, her breath pluming in the air. She scanned the approaching line, and there, near the back, just as she predicted, was Kale. His posture was rigid, his head turning constantly, assessing. He was giving quiet hand signals to a warrior beside him. "There," she whispered, pointing. "The beta, in the gray cloak." Rylan followed her gaze. A low, predatory sound hummed in his chest. He lifted a hand, a subtle gesture to a warrior hidden in the pines below. They watched as, with chilling discipline, the Silverfang force split. A group of about 15, armed with picks and torches, entered the mine shaft. The rest, including Kale, fanned out to secure the perimeter outside. "Now," Rylan murmured, his voice barely a breath. A moment later, a deep, grinding CRUMPH echoed from further down the ridge, followed by a roar of falling rock and a plume of dust snow. The eastern entrance. Sealed. The reaction below was instantaneous. The warriors outside whirled, confusion breaking their formation. A howl of alarm went up, cut short as the first volley of arrows hissed from the pine stands. Not fire arrows, but simple, deadly shafts aimed at legs and shoulders, meant to cripple, not kill. To cause panic. Chaos erupted. Kale was shouting orders, trying to rally his men into a defensive circle, but the terrain worked against him. The ridge was steep, the ground uneven. Rylan's wolves, knowing every stone, began to descend, not with a roar but with a silent, lethal purpose. "He'll try to fall back to the tree line to the south," Sienna said, her eyes glued to Kale's movements. "There's a game trail there. It's his only clear retreat." Rylan didn't question her. He gave another signal. as Kale and a knot of his personal guards began to edge toward the southern tree line. A group of Ryland's rogues materialized from the rocks above it, blocking the path. Kale was trapped between the ridge, the sealed mine, and the advancing rogues. Sienna felt a savage thrill. She was doing this. Her knowledge was shaping the battle. Ryland rose to his full height. "Stay here," he ordered, his eyes glowing with the promise of violence. He was going down to claim his prize. But as he moved, Kale, cornered and desperate, did something unexpected. He didn't fight toward the tree line. He turned, looked directly up the ridge as if he could sense them, and barked an order to the archers among his remaining men. Loose on the ridge, highest point. A dozen bows lifted, not aimed at the advancing rogues, but upward, toward them. "Get down!" Ryland snarled, throwing himself back toward Sienna, but it was too late. The arrows weren't aimed to kill. They were fire arrows, and they weren't aimed at the rocks. They arced high, their flaming tips describing deadly parabolas against the dawn sky. They slammed into the dry, ancient scrub and stunted pines dotting the ridgetop behind Sienna and Ryland's position. With a terrifying whoosh, the vegetation ignited. The wind, funneling up the ridge, caught the flames and sent them racing, creating a sudden, roaring wall of fire that cut off their retreat and began to circle them, hungry and swift. The heat was immense, a physical blow. Smoke billowed, choking and blinding. Sienna coughed, her eyes streaming. They were trapped on an outcrop, the cliff at their backs, fire closing in on 3 sides. Ryland pulled her against him, shielding her from the worst of the heat with his body. Through the crackle and roar, she heard Kale's voice, shouting up from below, laced with a triumph that was pure venom. "A gift for you, Rogue King. A pyre. And a message from Alpha Lucas. He said you'd understand the fire." Ryland stiffened. His face, so close to hers, was a mask of not just anger, but of dawning, horrific comprehension. The fire wasn't just a tactical move. It was a symbol, a message. The flames surged closer, the oxygen thinning. Sienna's son, wrapped securely against her chest, began to whimper. In that moment, facing a searing death, the final piece of the seer's riddle clicked into place with merciless clarity. Not the only weapon. Her human-born blood, her mother's legacy, an unstable connection, a conduit. Lucas hadn't just sent her as a bomb, he had sent her as a trigger. And Kale had just lit the fuse. Ryland looked into her smoke-stung eyes, his own wide with a realization that mirrored her terror. "The fire, your blood, it can't," the world exploded. But not from the flames around them, from inside her. A pressure, vast and ancient and screaming, tore through her veins. It was the moon, but it was also the sun. It was the heart of the mountain and the core of the fire. It was everything, and it was ripping her apart. A silent, seismic wave of raw power erupted from her skin, a shockwave of invisible force. The advancing wall of fire didn't just blow out. It reversed. With a deafening thump of displaced air, the flames were sucked backward, down the ridge, racing toward the archers who had loosed them with impossible, vengeful speed. The screams from below were swallowed by the inferno's roar as it turned back on its masters. On the outcrop, untouched by the flame but shattered by the blast, Sienna collapsed. The last thing she saw was Ryland's face, etched not with fear but with a staggering, awestruck horror. The last thing she heard was his voice, raw and shattered, as the world went black. "A pyrokinetic, moon and mountains, Sienna, what has he made you?" The silence after the fire was absolute, broken only by the crackle of dying embers and the ragged, terrified sound of Ryland's own breathing. He stared at the scorched earth, at the smoldering, blackened forms that had been Silverfang Archer's moments before. And then he looked down at Sienna, crumpled and unconscious in his arms, her skin still radiating a heat that shimmered the air. "What have you done?" The thought wasn't his own. It was a primal howl from the part of him that understood the old, forbidden things. "What has he made you become?" A low, pained groan from nearby snapped him back. "Kale." The beta was struggling to rise from where the concussive wave of Sienna's power had thrown him, his face a mask of blood, frost, and utter shock. His eyes, wide and white-rimmed, were fixed on Sienna. "The fire," Kale rasped, the taunt gone, replaced by raw, bewildered terror. He said she would burn for you. Not like that. Never like that." Ryland's snarl was a physical force. He laid Sienna down gently on a patch of unburned moss, her son, their son, still miraculously silent and secure against her chest in his sling. Then he was moving, a blur of fury. He hauled Cale up by the throat, slamming him against the blackened trunk of a pine. The scent of charred wood and cooked meat filled his nostrils. "Talk," Rylan growled, the word barely human. "You saw it. You know what she is." What was his real plan? Cale choked, clawing at Rylan's wrist. The seer, the one he took from the crags, the prophecy wasn't just about the pup. He gasped for air. It was about her. The cuckoo's egg, warmed by a false sun, will hatch a storm to cleanse the rival's nest. Lucas thought the storm was you. That sending her to you, with your child, would make you reckless, vulnerable. A storm of rage he could predict and counter. The pieces, jagged and cruel, clicked into a new, more horrifying configuration. Rylan loosened his grip a fraction. And the fire. A trigger. Cale's voice dropped to a whisper. He knew what she was. Her mother, the blood moon hunters talked. A human-born who could channel the moon's heat. A freak. A danger to the natural order. Lucas found the daughter. He thought he could control it. Contain it. Use it. He told me, "Cale, when you see the fire bloom in the Blackwood, you'll know I've given him a weapon that will consume him from the inside out." Cale's eyes flickered to Sienna's still form. He didn't know she could control it. He thought it would be a wildfire, that she'd burn you, your people, herself, a clean sweep. The monstrous calculus of it stole Rylan's breath. Lucas hadn't just sent a pawn. He'd sent a lit fuse into a powder keg, believing the resulting explosion would only destroy Rylan's world, not turn it into a weapon of its own. A soft whimper cut through the tension. Sienna was stirring, her eyelids fluttering. The unnatural heat was fading from her skin, leaving her pale and shivering violently. Rylan dropped Cale, letting him slump to the ground. He was at Sienna's side in an instant, his large hand cradling her cheek. "Sienna, look at me." Her eyes opened, clouded with confusion and pain. "Rylan, the fire, it was inside me." Her voice was a thread of sound. It listened. "I know," he said, his own voice gruff. He pulled a pelt from his pack, wrapping it around her. "Can you stand? We need to move. This light and smoke will draw every scout from here to the mountains." She nodded, a weak, determined motion, and with his help she got to her feet. She clutched her son, her knuckles white. Her gaze fell on Cale, who was watching them with the dazed look of a man whose world had just been inverted. Him. Rylan followed her look. The strategic part of his mind said kill him. Eliminate the beta, cripple Silverfang's command. But the deeper, more cunning part, the part that had survived as a rogue king, saw a different opportunity. A messenger. A crack in Lucas's armor now widened into a chasm. "Go," Rylan said to Cale, his tone devoid of all mercy. "Run back to your false alpha. Tell him what you saw. Tell him his cuckoo's egg didn't hatch a storm for me. It hatched one beside me. Tell him the weapon he forged is now in my hand, and I know its trigger." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "And tell him I'm coming for his seer. He took something of mine. I'll be taking something of his." Cale scrambled backward, then turned and fled into the smoky woods, his gait unsteady, his tail literally between his legs. "He'll tell Lucas everything," Sienna said, her voice gaining strength, layered with a new, hard edge. "Good," Rylan said, supporting her as they began moving north, away from the ridge, toward the deeper, higher paths that led to the enclave. "Let him be afraid. Let him doubt his own plans. Fear makes even alphas stupid." The journey back was a silent, grim procession. Rylan's warriors emerged from the trees, their faces etched with awe and a tinge of fear as they looked at Sienna. They had seen the fire reverse its course. They had felt the wave of heat. They formed a protective ring around them, but their usual rough camaraderie was absent, replaced by a wary reverence. If only I had known, Rylan thought, his gaze constantly scanning the forest, his ears tuned for pursuit. If only I had seen the dormant power in her that first night in the cave. I saw a tool, a victim. Lucas saw a bomb. The sound of the wind through the high pines was the only conversation for hours. Sienna was lost in her own shock, one hand constantly moving to touch her son, the other occasionally held out before her, staring at her palm as if it belonged to a stranger. As they finally descended into the hidden valley of the enclave, the usual sounds of life, the clang of a smith, the chatter from the shelters, died instantly. Every eye turned to them, to her. Mara stepped forward from the gathered crowd, her flinty eyes missing nothing. Sienna's pallor, the lingering scent of ozone and ash on her clothes, the stunned silence of the warriors. The ambush was a success, Rylan announced, his alpha voice cutting the quiet. Silverfang's eastern probe has been broken, but the battle has changed. He looked at Sienna, then back to his people. Lucas's strategy is deeper than we knew. He seeks to use forces older than pack law. He has miscalculated. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. The rumors would spread faster than any formal declaration. See to her, Rylan ordered Mara, guiding Sienna toward his own stone shelter, the largest in the enclave, built into the cliff face. Food, warmth, the pup needs checking. Mara gave a sharp nod, her expression unreadable, and ushered Sienna inside. Rylan remained at the entrance, watching the enclave slowly return to its guarded activity. The victory on the ridge felt hollow, overshadowed by the specter of what Sienna had done. He had wanted a weapon. He had gotten a cataclysm. Inside, by the fire, Sienna sat on a pile of furs, mechanically eating the stew Mara brought her. Her son fed quietly at her breast. The normalcy of the act seemed at odds with the woman who had wielded fire like a whip. The child is strong, Mara said abruptly, her voice softer than usual. No harm from the excitement. Sienna met her gaze. You heard. All the mountains heard the silence that comes after a thunderclap, Mara said cryptically. She studied Sienna. You didn't know. It wasn't a question. Sienna shook her head, a tear finally tracking through the grime on her cheek. My mother, she never said. She couldn't control it either. That's why they killed her. Mara was silent for a long moment. The old tales speak of human-borns. They are often unstable, bridges between our world and the raw magic of theirs. It is a dangerous gift. It's not a gift, Sienna whispered. It's a curse Lucas planted inside me. Perhaps, Mara conceded. But it is yours now, and you did not burn your allies, you burned your enemies. She stood, her businesslike demeanor returning. The Alpha will need to know what this means for his war. When Mara left, Rylan entered, filling the space of the shelter. He sat across from her, the firelight dancing over the scars on his face. I'm a monster, Sienna said, not looking at him. You're a survivor, he corrected, his voice low. Like me. Lucas tried to make you into a weapon of mass destruction. You chose your target. That's the difference between a force of nature and a tool. She finally looked up, her amber eyes glowing in the firelight. Can I control it? I don't know, he admitted, the honesty stark. But we have to find out, because he will send more fire. He will try to trigger you again, to make you lose control in the middle of my people in this valley. He leaned forward. You said it listened. What did that feel like? Sienna closed her eyes, remembering. It was a song, a terrible, beautiful song of heat and light just under my skin. Kale's arrows, they were like a shout. They woke it up. And for a moment, I could point the shout. She opened her eyes, vulnerability and fear mingling with a dawning, horrifying fascination. It wanted to be pointed. Rylan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He was speaking to two entities, the wounded, resilient Omega he had rescued, and the primordial power she contained. His next move was the most dangerous gamble of his life. Then we learn the song, he said, his decision made. Not to hide it, to master it, before Lucas can use the chorus against us. How? She breathed. We start now. He reached into a leather pouch at his belt and pulled out a single, fat candle made of rendered tallow. He placed it on a flat stone between them and lit it with a twig from the fire. The small, steady flame wavered in the draft. Look at it, he commanded, not unkindly. Just the flame, not the fire outside, not the memory. This one small flame, can you hear its song? Sienna stared, her brow furrowed in concentration. Minutes stretched. The candle flame guttered. Rylan watched her face, seeing the strain, the fear, the intense focus. He saw the moment something shifted. Her pupils dilated, reflecting the tiny point of light. The candle flame didn't roar or explode. It simply bent, like a blade of grass in a breeze, leaning toward Sienna until it was horizontal, pointing directly at her heart. It held that impossible angle, burning steadily sideways for 3 heartbeats. Then, with a soft puff, it went out. Sienna gasped, slumping backward, sweat beading on her forehead. It's so small, but so loud. Rylan didn't move. The horror was back, but so was a fierce, triumphant pride. She had done it, not with chaos, but with precision. What happened next would change everything, he thought. She is not just a weapon to be wielded. She is a warrior to be trained. Good, he said, his voice thick. Again, tomorrow. We train every day. A sudden, urgent howl echoed from the eastern watchtower, a specific staccato pattern. Not an alarm of immediate attack, but of urgent news. Rylan was on his feet in an instant, Sienna following his movement. He strode out of the shelter, Sienna close behind, wrapping a pelt around herself and her son. A scout, panting and bleeding from a gash on his arm, stood in the center of the enclave square, surrounded by a growing crowd. Alpha, the scout gasped. A messenger from the west, not Silverfang. From where? Rylan demanded. From the Blood Moon Pack. The words landed like a physical blow. Sienna froze beside him, her blood running cold. The scout swallowed. He came under a flag of parley. He says his Alpha has heard of the fire wielder in the Blackwood. He says his Alpha offers an alliance against Silverfang. He says... The scout's eyes flicked nervously to Sienna. He says he comes to reclaim a lost daughter of their blood and to settle the debt of her mother's betrayal. The silence in the enclave was absolute. Every wolf looked from Rylan to Sienna. Lucas had been the immediate threat, a known enemy with a twisted plan. But this was a ghost from a buried past, rising from a grave of old blood and older hatreds. The pack that had hunted her parents to extinction now knew she lived, and they knew what she could do. Rylan's growls started deep in his chest, a vibration of pure, territorial menace. The game had just expanded, and the stakes had skyrocketed. He had been preparing for a war on one front. Now, he faced the terrifying prospect of a war on two. Sienna met his gaze, the fear in her eyes hardening into a desperate resolve. The weapon was now the prize in a bidding war between two ruthless alphas, and her son, their son, was the key to it all. The scout finished, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. The messenger awaits at the neutral stone. He bears a gift, Alpha. He bears the preserved head of the seer Lucas captured, and a message. Rylan's voice was deadly calm. What message? The Blood Moon Alpha says, the fire belongs to its source. Send the half-breed home and we will burn Silverfang to ash for you. Keep her and you will burn with them. The cliffhanger was no longer about an attack. It was about an impossible choice, delivered with a grisly token of brutal power. The war had just gotten a third player. The seer's head, wrapped in oiled leather, sat between them on the council fire's stone ring. Its presence was a cold, silent scream. The Blood Moon messenger was gone, his ultimatum hanging in the thin mountain air like a poison. Surrender the half-breed, or face us alongside Silverfang. Rylan hadn't touched the grisly token. He stared into the flames, his profile carved from granite. The war leaders had been dismissed with terse orders. Double the sentries, prepare for a siege. Now it was just him and Sienna in the flickering dark. The wind whistled through the high passes, a lonely, predatory sound. They won't wait long, Sienna said, her voice barely disturbing the silence. She held her sleeping son closer, the child a warm, breathing anchor against the horror on the stones. They sent that to show they aren't making empty threats. I know what they sent it for, Rylan growled, the sound low and visceral. To remind you where you come from, to remind you what they do to aberrations. His flinty eyes lifted to hers. It's a message for you, not for me. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold traced her spine. He was right. The Blood Moon Alpha wasn't just claiming a weapon. He was claiming property he believed had escaped its rightful destruction. Her mother's fate, wrapped in leather. What do we do? The we slipped out, firm and natural. She was no longer just a burden to be protected. She was a reason for the war, a piece on the board. She needed to understand the game. Rylan finally moved, leaning forward to poke the fire with a charred stick. Embers spiraled upward. Lucas is wounded, not dead. His pack is regrouping. The Blood Moon offer is a feint. They hope I'm desperate enough to make a deal or foolish enough to fight you over it. They'll attack regardless. They want your power extinguished or leashed to their will. So we fight on two fronts. The reality of it was a vast, crushing weight. The Enclave was strong, but it was not an army of two full packs. No, Rylan said, and the word was a blade unsheathed. We make them fight each other, Sienna blinked. How? A grim, ruthless smile touched his lips. It was the expression of the rogue king, the monster of the Blackwood. By giving them what they both want, a chance at you, her heart stuttered. What? Not you, he said, his gaze sharpening on her face. The idea of you, a prize, a single, clear target. He pointed the stick at the map scratched into the hard earth near the fire. The jagged lines of the mountains, the dark smudge of the Blackwood, the relative positions of Silverfang and the approaching blood moon force from the western crags. They're converging. Their alliance is one of convenience, built on mutual greed and a shared enemy. Me. It's fragile. We break it by making you appear vulnerable, in a place where their greed will override their temporary truce. The plan unfolded in his low, steady voice, a thing of terrifying audacity. He spoke of leaked information, of a calculated retreat, of baiting both alphas into a single, narrow killing ground where their forces would be forced to collide. The eastern ridge with its old mine shafts was mentioned again, but it wasn't about trapping Silverfang alone anymore. You want to use me as live bait, Sienna stated, the fear coiling in her gut not of the plan, but of failing it. I want to use you as a beacon, Rylan corrected, his eyes holding hers. The one thing in this world that can draw both those mad dogs into the same hole, and when they're in it, snarling over the bone, we collapse it on top of them. The sheer, brutal scale of it left her breathless. It was a gamble with the lives of everyone in the Enclave, with her son's life, with mine. She looked down at the baby's peaceful face. He knew nothing of alphas or wars or the fire in his mother's blood. He only knew warmth and safety. The thought of that safety, being a calculated part of Rylan's strategy. Where do I need to be? She asked, the words leaving her lips before the fear could choke them. Rylan studied her for a long moment, as if assessing the steel he'd seen her forge in the ravine and at the ridge. With me, at the center, where I can see you. He said it not as a romantic pledge, but as a tactical necessity. Your power, if you can even partially control it when the time comes. It could be the spark that ignites the whole trap, she finished, understanding dawning. He didn't just want her as bait. He wanted the wildfire, but one he could aim. Yes, he tossed the stick into the fire. Can you do it? The question of the century. She thought of the candle flame, of the tiny, obedient flicker she'd summoned under his guidance. Then she thought of the inferno that had vaporized the snow and shattered the trees. The gap between them was an ocean. I don't know. Then we start now, he said, rising to his feet. The messenger bought us a day, maybe two. We don't have weeks for gentle lessons. He led her away from the council fire, away from the grim token, to a secluded, rocky basin behind the main shelters. It was a natural bowl, shielded from the wind, the ground covered in hard-packed snow and scree. The moon was a sharp sliver overhead, a cold, distant eye. Feel it, Rylan commanded, standing opposite her, his arms crossed. Not the fear, the heat, the memory of the heat. Sienna closed her eyes, trying to quiet the whirlwind in her mind, the seer's head, Lucas's smirk, her mother's unknown face. She reached for the sensation that had preceded the explosion. The unbearable pressure, the feeling of her blood singing like a plucked wire, the need to release. Nothing. Just the chill of the mountain night and a profound, frustrating emptiness. It's not there, she whispered, opening her eyes, despair creeping in. It only comes when everything is falling apart. Then we bring you to the edge, Rylan said, and his voice changed. It dropped, taking on a gravelly, deliberate tone. Lucas never wanted you. You were a tool, a vessel. He took your memories. He lied to you every day he touched you. He sent you to die in the snow, carrying my child. Each sentence was a lash. Sienna flinched, the old wounds tearing open with fresh, vicious clarity. Shame and betrayal, hot and acidic, rose in her throat. The blood moon alpha, Rylan continued, relentless, stepping closer. He hunted your mother like an animal. He would have slaughtered you in your crib. He calls you an aberration. He wants to put you in a cage or put your head in a bag. Tears of rage now, mixing with the shame. Her hands clenched at her sides. A A faint tremor began in her core. Kale held a knife to your son's throat, Rylan hissed, now only a few feet away, his presence overwhelming, his words carving into her. He would have done it. He followed orders, Lucas's orders, to kill an infant. A sound escaped her, a raw, choked gasp. The pressure was building, not in her blood, but in her chest, a tight, screaming ball of anguish and fury. The images flashed. Kale's cold eyes, the glint of the blade, the endless, frozen forest. They are coming, Rylan said, his voice the final, crushing weight. Both of them, to take him, to take you, to burn everything and everyone around you to ash. What are you going to do about it, Sienna? The ball of emotion ignited. It wasn't the all-consuming inferno of the ridge. This was a focused, white-hot jet of rage. With a cry that was part sob, part snarl, she thrust her hands out, not at Rylan, but at a boulder the size of a wolf to her left. A whip-crack of searing, blue-tinged flame lanced from her palms. It struck the rock not with an explosion, but with a terrifying, sustained hiss. The sound of superheated stone meeting ancient ice. Steam billowed in a violent cloud, and when it cleared, the surface of the boulder was glazed and blackened, a deep, molten scar etched into its heart. Silence. The echo of the hiss faded. The smell of ozone and scorched granite hung in the air. Sienna stared at her hands, then at the scarred rock. Her breath came in ragged, shuddering pulls. She had done that. She had aimed it. She had controlled it. Rylan let out a long, slow breath. There was no horror in his eyes this time, only a fierce, blazing approval. Good! That single word meant more than any praise she'd ever received. She hadn't lost herself. She had channeled it. Now, he said, his voice returning to its usual commanding gravel. Do it again, without the speech. Find the heat, command it. The next hour was a cycle of exhausting, terrifying effort. She couldn't always summon it. Sometimes, only a pathetic wisp of smoke curled from her fingertips. Other times, a wild, uncontrolled burst would singe the snow at her feet, making her jump back. But twice more, she managed to replicate the focused lance of fire, scarring the boulder further, each strike a bit more deliberate. She was sweating, trembling with fatigue, her energy sapped as if she'd run for miles. The power drew from something deep within her, something finite. Enough, Rylan said, finally, as she failed to produce even a spark for the 5th time in a row. You're drained. That's your limit for now. He approached, not touching her, but his presence was steadying. You found the trigger. You directed it. That is what we need. In the chaos of the fight, the rage will be there. You must reach for the control you found tonight. She nodded, too tired to speak. The world seemed to sway slightly. He saw it and his hand shot out, gripping her elbow to steady her. The contact was firm, electric. You will not break, he said, the words a vow. I will not allow it. He guided her back to the shelter Mara had assigned her, a small, single-room stone hut near his own. A young rogue woman was there, watching over the sleeping baby. She left with a silent nod. Sienna sank onto the pile of furs, the weight of the day and the effort of her training crashing down on her all at once. Rylan did not leave immediately. He stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the night. Sleep! Tomorrow we move. The scouts have already begun spreading the whispers. What whispers? She asked, her voice thick. That the Rogue King's new weapon is fragile. That the trauma of the battle has left her unstable. That she and the child are being hidden in a vulnerable location on the eastern ridge, guarded by a skeleton force, while Rylan rallies his main strength elsewhere. He said it with cold satisfaction. They will hear it, they will believe it because they want to. Greed is a louder voice than reason. He turned to go. Rylan, he paused. Thank you for not treating me like I'm made of glass. He looked back over his shoulder, the sliver of moonlight catching the scar on his face. You're not glass, Sienna. You're a spark in a tinder-dry forest, and I am going to watch you burn our enemies to the ground. He left, closing the hide curtain behind him. Sienna lay down next to her son, her body aching, her mind churning. The plan was insane. It was brilliant. It could get them all killed. She replayed the feel of the fire leaving her hands, the will behind it. Control. It was the one thing Lucas and the Blood Moon Alpha never believed she could possess. She must have slept, because the sound of the horn jolted her from a deep, dreamless void. It was not the alert call of a sentry. It was a low, mournful, echoing blast that rolled through the enclave, vibrating in the stones. Once, twice, a third time, a death knell. She was on her feet, the baby clutched to her, before the third note faded. Outside, she heard the sounds of running feet, low, urgent voices, the clatter of weapons. The enclave was waking not to battle, but to grief. She pushed out of the hut. The pre-dawn light was a gray smear in the east. Rogues were gathering in the central clearing, faces grim. Rylan was already there, standing over a shape laid out on the ground, covered with a cloak. Mara stood beside him, her expression like stone. Rylan looked up as Sienna approached. His eyes were chips of black ice. He didn't speak. He simply reached down and pulled back the cloak. Beneath it was Jax, his loyal scout, her protector in the ravine. His throat had been cut with surgical precision. But that wasn't the message. Resting on his chest, placed with deliberate care, was a small, familiar object. Sienna's breath left her in a rush. It was the other half of the moonstone pendant. Her pendant, the one Lucas had kept. It was clean, polished, and glinting in the torchlight. The first half had been a taunt. This was an answer. Mara's voice cut through the stunned silence, flat and cold. He was found at the edge of the neutral ground. No tracks, no scent, just him and that. Ryland's hand closed slowly into a fist. He looked from the pendant to Sienna, his jaw a rigid line. "He's telling us he knows the plan," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He's telling us he can reach into our territory and take what he wants. And he's telling you." His gaze locked with Sienna's, filled with a dawning, terrible realization. That he's coming for the rest of his set. The implications slammed into her. Lucas wasn't just playing the strategic game. He was making it personal. He had killed a man under Ryland's protection to return a piece of jewelry, to remind her she was still his. And if he knew the plan, then the trap was already sprung. But not on him, on them. The mournful horn seemed to still be echoing in the stones as Ryland lifted his head, not towards the east where Silverfang lay, but towards the western crags. A new, acrid scent tainted the dawn wind, not pine and snow, but smoke. Distant but unmistakable. "Mara," Ryland said, the word a death sentence. "The watchfire on the western pass," Mara replied, her flinty eyes wide with a shock she rarely showed. "It's been lit. The Blood Moon force, they're not waiting for a parley. They're moving. Now. 2 fronts, 1 trap. And Lucas had just shown them he was already inside the game, holding a knife to its throat." Ryland looked at Sienna, at the pendant on Jax's still chest, at the sleeping child in her arms. The calculation in his eyes was gone, replaced by something far more primal. "They're not converging on the ridge," he said, the truth cracking open like the scar on the boulder. "He's led them here, to the enclave." The cliff face of the hidden valley, once their fortress, now felt like the walls of a tomb. The horn's echo was swallowed by a new sound, rolling down from the high peaks, the deep, synchronized thunder of war drums. The war drums from the west and the grisly message from the east struck in the same terrible heartbeat. The enclave wasn't a fortress. It was a target. Ryland's roar of pure, incandescent rage shook ice from the eaves. "He's here. He's in my mountains." Sienna stumbled back from Jax's body, the carved bone token in her hand now slick with cold dread. Lucas wasn't just coming. He was already inside the walls. The pendant, her mother's pendant, winked cruelly in the dawn light from Jax's still chest. A recall, a claim. "Sound the full alarm." Ryland's voice, a whip crack of command, severed the frozen shock. "Mara, evacuate the young and the elders to the deep tunnels, now, warriors to the high rocks. They'll come from the western pass and the eastern crag. We meet them in the killing ground between." The enclave exploded into a frenzy of controlled panic. Sienna's mind, however, had gone cold and clear. Bait. He wanted me as bait, but he didn't realize the bait was already in the trap. She looked at Rylan, his face a mask of ferocious calculation. "The training basin," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It's a bowl. They'll try to flank the shelters and get funneled there." Ryland's gaze snapped to her. He saw no panic, only a grim, focused clarity. He gave a sharp nod. "You're with me. Your fire is a spark," she finished, clutching the bone token. "But a spark can start a blaze in a tinderbox." He grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "The pup. With Mara, Sienna said, the words a prayer. Then we make our stand. He pulled her into a run, not toward the defensive walls, but toward the rocky, open training ground behind the shelters. The air was no longer just cold. It was charged with the scent of pine, fear, and the distant, metallic tang of armed wolves. The first wave hit not from outside, but from within. As they sprinted past the last stone hut, a Silverfang hunter, his fur dusted with gray rock dust from some hidden crevice, lunged from a shadowed alcove. He wasn't aiming for Rylan. His knife was leveled at Sienna's throat. Lucas's orders: retrieve or eliminate the weapon. Rylan moved like a shadow detaching from darkness. He didn't block the knife. He caught the hunter's wrist, twisted, and the snap of bone was a dry twig in the chaos. A second hunter emerged, and a third. They had infiltrated in the night, lying in wait. Jax had been a cleanup, not the spearhead. "Go!" Rylan snarled, shoving Sienna ahead as he turned to face the three. "To the basin. Hold the high rock." Sienna ran, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The sounds of brutal, efficient violence followed her, a choked gurgle, a heavy thud. She didn't look back. She crested the rise and skidded into the training basin, the secluded rocky bowl where just hours before she'd first summoned a controlled flame. Now it felt like an arena. The sight that greeted her stole her breath. From the western rim, figures emerged. They were not Silverfang. They moved with a different, looser gait, clad in hides dyed with deep ochre and blood red. Blood Moon warriors. At their forefront stood a hulking lieutenant, his nose lifted, scenting the air. His eyes locked onto Sienna, alone in the basin. "The half-breed," he growled, his voice carrying. "The Alpha wants her smoking heart." From the eastern rim, answering growls erupted. Silverfang hunters, led by a familiar, cold-faced beta, poured over the rocks. Kale. His eyes swept the basin, past Sienna, to the approaching Blood Moon pack. A flicker of surprise, then cold understanding hardened his features. Lucas had played the Blood Moon, too. Sienna stood in the center, the pivot point. Two enemy forces, converging on her, seeing each other for the first time. The air crackled with hostile recognition. Kale barked a command. "The asset is Silverfang property. Eliminate the interlopers." The Blood Moon lieutenant laughed, a harsh sound. "Your Alpha offered a prize. He didn't say you'd be guarding it." What happened next was not a battle, but a collision. A Blood Moon warrior, overeager, leapt down the rocks toward Sienna. A Silverfang arrow took him in the throat before his paws touched the basin floor. The trigger was pulled. A roar of fury erupted from both sides. Wolves surged into the basin from opposite ends, slamming into each other with a cacophony of snarls, clashing steel, and tearing flesh. Sienna was suddenly in the eye of a hurricane of violence. She backed against the central rock, the one she'd used for target practice. Her hands were empty. Her power was a sleeping, terrified beast in her chest. A Silverfang hunter, breaking from the melee, charged her. She saw the killing intent in his eyes, the same look Kale had worn in the ravine. Instinct took over. Not wolf instinct. Something older. A memory of her mother's stories about catching sunlight in her hands. She didn't try to summon a wall of flame. She focused on the hunter's leather vest, on the dry bindings. She thought of a single, hungry spark. A pop, a wisp of smoke. Then a tiny, bright ember glowed to life on his shoulder strap. He batted at it, confused. It caught, a small flame licking at the treated leather. It was nothing, a distraction, but it was controlled. A shadow fell over her. Rylan landed beside her, blood streaking his arm. He took in the scene, the two packs savaging each other, Sienna unharmed. A savage, approving grin cut across his face. "You lit the fuse. Now watch the powder keg burn." He threw back his head and let out a howl, not of alarm, but of summons. It was answered immediately from the high rocks above the basin, not from the rims where the enemies had entered, but from the concealed positions he'd ordered his warriors to at dawn. Rylan's rogues, who had let the enemies flow into the bowl, now revealed themselves. Arrows rained down, not fire arrows, but sharp, precise shots aimed at the thickest knots of combatants. They did not discriminate between Silverfang and Blood Moon. They sowed chaos upon chaos. Kale, fighting his way toward Sienna, saw the trap, his face contorted in rage. "Rylan, face me, you coward." Ryland's grin vanished. "Stay!" he ordered Sienna, and launched himself into the fray, a force of nature carving a path toward the beta. Sienna pressed against the rock, her eyes darting. The battle was a swirling nightmare, but she saw the pattern. Ryland's plan, adapted on the fly, was working. The two enemy packs were grinding each other down, while his warriors picked them off from safety. But the numbers, there were too many. The basin was filling with wounded and dead, but more were coming over the rims. A blood moon warrior, clever and fast, dodged the main fight and came at her from the side. His ochre-stained knife was aimed low for her belly to cripple. The terror was instant, icy. Her son's face flashed in her mind. The sleeping beast in her chest woke in a surge of primal, protective fury. No, she didn't think of a spark. She thought of an inferno. She threw her hands out, not at the warrior, but at the ground between them, at the dry, brittle scrub and winter grass. The air thumped, as if struck by a giant's hand. A line of fire, not a gentle bloom but a roaring, instantaneous wall, erupted from the earth. It was 10 feet high, a curtain of pure, roaring heat. The blood moon warrior screamed, reeling back, his clothing smoldering. The fire roared, consuming the scrub, cutting the basin in two. It was uncontrolled. It was wild. It was hers. Every head in the basin turned. The fighting stuttered. Wolves from both sides stumbled back from the terrifying, unnatural heat. In that moment of stunned silence, only the crackle of flames spoke. Ryland, disengaging from Cale, stared at her across the wall of fire. His expression wasn't awe. It was something darker. Horror. He had wanted a weapon, but this was a force of nature he might not be able to command. Cale, seizing the distraction, barked a retreat order. The surviving Silverfang hunters began to disengage, dragging their wounded toward the eastern rim. The Blood Moon lieutenant, his face blistered from the heat, snarled but mirrored the command. The alliance of convenience was shattered. The trap had sprung, but the cost was written in the flames. The fire began to die as quickly as it had come, the fuel exhausted, leaving a charred, smoking scar across the basin. Sienna sank to her knees, trembling violently, the afterimage of the flames seared behind her eyes. She felt hollowed out, scorched from the inside. Rylan was at her side in an instant, hauling her to her feet. "Can you walk?" She nodded, mute. "The Enclave," he said, his voice urgent. This was a diversion. A big, bloody, noisy diversion. The truth crashed down on her. While the warriors were drawn here to the spectacle of the bait and the brawl, "Mara," Sienna gasped. "The tunnels." They abandoned the basin, leaving their warriors to mop up the scattered, fleeing enemies. As they sprinted back toward the heart of the Enclave, the sounds of a different kind of struggle reached them. Not the clash of battle, but the screams of the defenseless, the snarls of a precise, surgical strike. The evacuation point was a slaughterhouse. The deep tunnel entrance, hidden behind the healer's hut, was choked with bodies, not warriors. Elders, a young mother clutching 2 children. Mara lay sprawled on the threshold, a deep gash across her brow, but still breathing, still trying to rally the few guards who remained. And standing amid the carnage, a clean, untouched island in the blood and snow, was Lucas. Silverfang Alpha Lucas. He wore no armor, only his dark tunic. He held no weapon. In his arms, wrapped snugly in a white wolf pelt, was Sienna's son. The world stopped. The sound faded. Sienna's breath froze in her lungs. Her heart didn't beat, it shattered. Lucas looked up as they arrived. His face was calm, handsome, and utterly devoid of remorse. His eyes, the eyes she had once believed held love, found hers. He smiled. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "Hello, Sienna," he said, his voice gentle, conversational, as if they'd met at a spring gathering. He jiggled the bundle in his arms gently. "He has your eyes, but he has his father's stubborn set to his mouth." He glanced at Rylan, whose whole body was a bowstring pulled to breaking. "Isn't that right, brother?" The word hung in the bloody air. Brother. Rylan's snarl died in his throat. His furious advance halted. He stared at Lucas, then at the child in his arms, then back at Lucas, as if seeing him for the first time. Lucas's smile widened, pleased with the devastation. "You didn't know. All this time you truly didn't know," he chuckled, a soft, chilling sound. "Father was so disappointed when you left." but I always knew you'd come back to the family business. You just needed the right motivation." He looked down at the sleeping pup, then back at Sienna, his gaze settling on the bone token she still clutched in her white-knuckled hand. "Now," Lucas said, his voice dropping to a deadly, intimate pitch, "you're going to come with me, and you're going to be a good girl, or I'll show you what happens to weapons that misfire." He nodded to the child in his arms. Starting with the spare, the world stopped. The crackle of dying flames, the moans of the wounded, the very wind in the pines, all of it vanished under the weight of that single, impossible word. Brothers. Rylan stood as if struck by lightning. The raw, animal fury that had defined him moments before drained away, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of a man. His eyes, fixed on Lucas's triumphant face, held no recognition, only a profound, chilling disorientation. Sienna's own terror for her son was momentarily eclipsed by the seismic shockwave passing through the rogue alpha beside her. If only she had known the true depth of the crack she'd just seen form in his foundation. "You lie," Rylan breathed, the words barely a whisper, yet they carried across the bloodied snow. Lucas's smile was a knife twist. He adjusted his grip on the bundled pup, who had fallen into an exhausted, terrified silence. "Why would I? It's the final piece, Rylan. The reason our dear father, the great alpha of Silverfang, let his firstborn son run off to play king of the outcasts. He always knew you'd rebel. He counted on it. A thorn in the side of the neighboring packs, a convenient monster to blame, a living challenge to keep his real pack sharp." He glanced down at the child in his arms. "And now, a source of strong, rogue blood to steal and mold. Family tradition." The sound that escaped Rylan was not a growl, but a strangled, human sound of betrayal so deep it had no name. Sienna saw his hands tremble. "No, no, you cannot break now." Her mind screamed it, even as her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped by Lucas's gaze. He was watching her, savoring her paralysis. "The ultimatum stands, Sienna," Lucas said, his voice dropping into that intimate, cruel register she remembered from their last private conversation before her exile. "Come to me, submit, or I will show you what happens to defective weapons that are misaimed." A low, collective growl rippled from the surviving Enclave warriors who formed a half-circle behind Rylan and Sienna. Mara stood among them, her face a mask of grim fury, but her eyes were on Rylan, waiting for a command that didn't come. He was still locked in that silent, internal cataclysm. Sienna took a step forward. The snow crunched, a deafening sound in the tension. "Sienna!" Rylan's voice was raw, a broken thing. It wasn't a command to stop. It was the plea of a lost boy. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Lucas, on the swaddled bundle in his arms. "You fabricated everything," she said, her own voice surprisingly steady. "The mate bond, the love, it was all just alchemy and strategy. To get to this," she gestured weakly to the child, to Rylan, to the burning basin beyond the ridge. "To get to her," she meant her mother's power. "It was efficient," Lucas shrugged, a chilling dismissal of years of her life. "You were a dormant asset in my territory. I activated you. Now you're fully charged, and it's time to return you to your rightful owner, along with my nephew." He said the word with deliberate, mocking emphasis, watching Rylan flinch. "Last chance. Walk to me or I break his leg. A small, clean fracture. Pups heal so quickly, don't they?" The threat was a physical blow. Sienna's breath hitched. Her fire, that terrifying well of power, surged in her veins in response to her panic, a heat that threatened to spill out and burn everything, including her child. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, using the sharp pain to anchor herself. "Think, he's a strategist. Every move has 3 purposes. What does he want right now?" He wanted her submission. He wanted Rylan broken. But most of all, he wanted a spectacle. He was performing for his own warriors at the tunnel mouth, for the terrified remnants of the Enclave, for Rylan himself. He needed this victory to be absolute, psychological, and clean. A messy execution of a pup wouldn't serve that. It would make him a brute, not a master. It was a thin, desperate thread of logic, but it was all she had. "If you harm him," Sienna said, forcing a coldness into her tone she did not feel, "you prove you're afraid. You prove Ryland's blood is so strong, so threatening, that you must cripple it as an infant. Is that the legacy of the mighty Silverfang Alpha? A baby breaker? Lucas's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed. She had struck a nerve, his vanity, his obsession with legacy and perception. In that fractional hesitation, a change swept over Rylan. It was not a sudden roar, not a resurgence of his former rage. It was something quieter, deadlier. The disorientation in his eyes hardened into a glacial focus. The tremor in his hands stilled. He lifted his head, and when he looked at Lucas now, it was not with the shock of a betrayed brother, but with the calculating clarity of a general who has just identified the enemy's true weakness. The Brotherhood was a weapon Lucas had wielded. Rylan, visibly, sheathed its edge. "You talk of fathers and legacy," Rylan said, his voice now low and resonant, carrying a new, terrifying calm. "But you are here, in the dirt and blood, doing the work yourself, Lucas. Where is your army, your beta? You risked everything for a personal grab. That's not strategy. That's greed. And greed makes you stupid." He took a step forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Sienna. A protective, but more importantly, a redirecting move. All attention shifted back to him. "You want her. You want the child. You think claiming a blood tie to me grants you some right?" A cold, mirthless smile touched Rylan's lips. "I renounced that blood the day I left. My pack is not my blood. It is my choice. And I choose them." He gestured to Mara, to the wounded Jax being supported by another warrior, to the grim-faced rogues at his back. "They are not thorns or tools. They are my family, something you will never understand." Lucas's composure was cracking. The performance wasn't going as scripted. Rylan was supposed to be shattered, not galvanized. "Sentimental drivel," Lucas spat. "It changes nothing. I hold the pup." "You hold a pup," Rylan countered, and his gaze flicked almost imperceptibly to Sienna for a heartbeat. A signal. A question, trust me. Her heart stopped. What was he doing? Rylan looked back at Lucas. "You are so sure of your intelligence, so sure you know what a weapon is, but you only see the fire." He paused, letting the words hang in the frigid air. The only sound was the distant, dying crackle of the forest fire in the basin. You never asked what the sheath was made of. Sienna's mind raced. The sheath. And then she understood. A wild, impossible plan crystallized in the space between Rylan's words and Lucas's confusion. It was a gamble of monstrous proportions. It required a precision her power had never shown. It required her to be not a torrent but a scalpel. She gave the faintest nod, her eyes locked on her son. "Enough of this," Lucas snarled, his patience gone. He hoisted the bundle higher. "Sienna, now or he pays." "No," Rylan said, simple and final, and he attacked. But not with claws, not with a direct lunge. He moved laterally, fast and low, a blur of motion aimed not at Lucas, but at the cluster of Silverfang elite guards flanking him. It was a diversion, a violent, beautiful distraction that erupted into a storm of snarls and snapping jaws. In the chaos, Lucas's attention split for a critical second, between the threat Rylan posed to his perimeter and the prize in his arms. Sienna didn't move her feet. She focused everything, every ounce of fear, love, and desperate hope, into a single pinpoint command. Not a wall of flame, not an explosion, a thread, a filament of pure, concentrated heat, invisible in the daylight, born from the core of her being and directed with a mother's terrifying accuracy. At the woolen swaddling cloth around her son, she felt it leave her, a taut, burning line. She saw it in her mind's eye, touching the fabric just below Lucas's clutching hands. The cloth, already damp from snow, didn't burst into flame. It smoldered. Then, with a sharp sound, a section of it blackened and disintegrated, creating a sudden, hot weakness in the bindings. Lucas felt the heat and jerked his hand back with a startled curse. The bundled pup, suddenly unbalanced by the shift and the failing cloth, slipped. It was not a fall. It was a short, downward slide from Lucas's grip toward the ground. Time seemed to slow. Lucas scrambled to regrip. A Silverfang guard turned from Rylan's assault, eyes wide. From the shadow of a scorched pine, a gray streak shot forward. Mara. She moved with the silent, lethal speed of the mountain cat she resembled. She didn't try to attack Lucas. She dove, low and fluid, and caught the falling bundle against her chest, rolling through the snow and coming up in a crouch 3 yards away. The pup clutched safely to her, a snarl ripping from her throat. Lucas roared in pure, undiluted fury. Sienna's thread of fire snapped out and she staggered, the precise effort draining her. But her son was out of Lucas's direct grasp. The battlefield dynamic shattered. Rylan, having scattered the guards, spun back toward Lucas, his path now clear. Lucas, enraged and deprived of his primary hostage, shifted his stance, his eyes blazing with murderous intent. The two brothers faced each other across a short expanse of trampled, blood-stained snow. "You lose," Rylan stated. "I take her then," Lucas hissed, and his gaze shot to Sienna, full of venomous possession. "And I raze this valley to the ground." A new sound cut through the standoff, not a howl, but the deep, rhythmic thump of many paws hitting frozen earth at a run. From the eastern treeline, a wave of wolves emerged. Not Silverfang. These were larger, rangier, with pelts in shades of iron and rust. At their head loped a massive, scarred wolf with eyes like polished amber. The Blood Moon pack had arrived at the enclave. They fanned out, a fresh, disciplined force of at least 30, cutting off the Silverfang retreat from the tunnel and positioning themselves between the enclave survivors and the two opposing alphas. The lead wolf shifted. The man who rose was tall, with a heavy brow and a beard braided with iron rings. His eyes swept the scene, lingering on the burning basin in the distance, the dead, and finally on Sienna. "The pyrokinetic," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He ignored Lucas and Rylan completely, addressing Sienna. "The Blood Moon Alpha's offer is rescinded. He does not bargain for weapons that are already lit. He commands. You will come with us. Your instability makes you a plague. You will be contained, or you will be extinguished." Sienna stood trapped between 3 converging horrors: the brother who had betrayed her, the brother who was only just learning to stand again, and the pack that wanted to cage her for what she was. The fragile victory of saving her son evaporated. Lucas laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "It seems your weapon is in high demand, brother. But a weapon without a sheath," he echoed Rylan's words with a sneer, "ends up burning its wielder. Which one of us will she destroy first?" The Blood Moon commander took a step forward, his warriors mirroring the movement, a noose tightening. Rylan moved to place himself squarely in front of Sienna, his back to her, a solid wall of defiance against both threats. But he was wounded, his pack was decimated, and they were surrounded. The commander's amber eyes fixed on Rylan. "Stand aside, rogue king. This does not concern your petty feud. We are here for the aberration. Do not make us go through you." Rylan's shoulders tensed. He didn't look back at Sienna. He simply said, low enough for only her to hear, "When I move, you run for Mara and the deep tunnel. Take our son. Go." He was going to fight them all, to the death, to give her a chance. But before he could lunge, before the Blood Moon pack could spring, a fourth, entirely unexpected sound echoed from the high cliffs above the enclave. A long, mournful, singular howl. It was not a war cry. It was a lament. And it was answered not by wolves, but by a deep, shivering silence that fell over the forest, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Every head, alpha, warrior, and rogue alike, turned upward. Silhouetted against the gray sky on the highest rocky promontory stood a lone figure in tattered robes. The wind whipped at the fabric. In its hands, it held a staff topped with a pale, glowing stone that pulsed with a soft, sickly light. The seer. Not captive in Silverfang, but here. Free. The figure raised a bony hand, pointing directly down into the valley, not at Sienna, not at the child, but at the space between Rylan and Lucas. A voice, thin and ancient, yet carrying with unnatural clarity, rasped across the distance, filling the sudden quiet. "The fire is not the weapon, the blood is not the bond, the war is not for territory." The seer's staff pulsed brighter. "It is for the womb that carries the second moon. You fight over the spark, while the kindling awaits in the heart of the Silverfang." The words meant nothing and everything. Lucas's face went pale with a dawning, horrified comprehension that seemed to eclipse even his rage. Rylan stiffened, a low growl building in his chest. The Blood Moon commander looked baffled, then his eyes widened as he looked from Lucas to Rylan, and back to the seer. Sienna's blood ran cold. The second moon, the kindling in the heart of Silverfang. The seer's arm swung, the staff now pointing unmistakably at her. The ancient voice dropped to a whisper that somehow pierced every ear. Ask the Omega, Alpha Lucas. Ask her what she remembers of the night of the twin moons, 2 years past. Ask her what else she left behind in your territory. And with that, the figure vanished behind the cliff edge, leaving only the echo of its prophecy and a silence more terrifying than any roar. All eyes turned to Sienna. Lucas's fury was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "The twin moons," he whispered. "The gathering, you were sick for days after. You said it was the wine." Rylan slowly turned his head to look at her, his expression unreadable. The ground felt like it was falling away beneath Sienna's feet. She remembered that night. A blur of music and laughter at the stone river, a strange dizziness, Lucas leading her away, and then nothing but a deep, blank void and a week of fevered illness afterward. She had always assumed. A memory, sharp and visceral and not her own, stabbed into her mind. Not of Rylan in the woods, but of a sterile stone room, the scent of bitter herbs, the cold touch of metal, and a different, profound emptiness. Her hands flew to her abdomen, to the place where her son had so recently grown. The seer's words clanged in her soul. What else she left behind? Lucas took a staggering step back, his gaze dropping to the pup now in Mara's arms, then flying back to Sienna's horrified face. His calculated composure shattered completely, revealing a genuine, world-altering terror. "No," Lucas breathed, the master strategist undone by a truth he had never calculated. "It's not possible, I would have known." Rylan's voice was a blade of ice. "Known what, brother?" Lucas didn't answer him. He stared only at Sienna, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper meant for her alone, yet carrying in the dead silence. "You weren't carrying one child that night," he said, the words slicing through her. "You were carrying 2. The cliff edge of the world gave way. "The other one," Lucas said, his face ashen, "is still in Silverfang." The word hung in the frozen air, a poison that seeped into the cracks of Sienna's soul. Twins. She had carried 2 lives. One was safe, wailing in Mara's arms. The other was in Silverfang. Lucas's face, a mask of furious shock at the seer's words, confirmed it. He hadn't just stolen her future, he had stolen half of her past. "You took my child," Sienna whispered, the words not a question but a curse. The fire in her veins, so recently a precise tool, surged with a blind, grieving rage. The snow at her feet began to steam. "Silence her," the Blood Moon commander barked, his amber eyes fixed on Sienna with predatory hunger. His warriors shifted, a wall of iron and fur blocking the path to the cliffs. "The aberration is ours. The pact is clear. The human-born taint must be culled at the root." Rylan stepped in front of Sienna, a wall of scarred muscle and cold fury. His gaze was locked not on the Blood Moon, but on Lucas. The horror of their brotherhood was still there, a wound in his eyes, but it was cauterized now by a sharper, deadlier purpose. "You kept a pup from its mother." Rylan's voice was gravel, grinding out the words. "Our father would have skinned you for less." Lucas's composure was fracturing. The seer's revelation had thrown his perfect, cruel plan into chaos. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "The child is a Silverfang. Raised in my house, it knows no other father." The word was a knife. Sienna's breath hitched. A son, a daughter. The memory was a black hole, a void of stolen time after the gathering. She remembered the disorientation, the lingering scent of strange herbs Lucas had given her for her fatigue. The lie had started before she ever knew she was pregnant. Crack. A Silverfang archer, seizing the distraction, loosed a fire arrow. It wasn't aimed at a person, but at the thatched roof of a nearby shelter. The dry material caught with a whoosh, a pillar of flame and smoke that split the battlefield's focus. "Now," roared the Blood Moon commander, seeing his opening. What happened next was a storm of 3-way violence. The Blood Moon warriors surged toward Sienna. Rylan's rogues, disciplined and fierce, met them in a crashing line of bodies. and Lucas's remaining Silverfangs, seeing their alpha's target threatened, turned their weapons on the Blood Moon flank. Chaos. Beautiful, terrible chaos. Rylan grabbed Sienna's arm, his grip iron. "The memory," he hissed into her ear, his voice cutting through the clash of steel and snarls. "The gathering, the stone river, what do you see?" Sienna squeezed her eyes shut, trying to push past the panic, the roar of battle, the phantom cry of a child she never heard. She saw the bonfire. The taste of spiced wine Lucas had pressed into her hand. Rylan's face across the crowd, a dark, brooding stranger their eyes had met for a fleeting, electric moment. Then nothing, a blur, a sense of weightlessness. Waking in her own bed, with a throbbing head, and a hollow feeling she'd attributed to drink. "He drugged me," she gasped, her eyes flying open. After we, he must have taken me back. He had healers, they could have." "Hidden a second pregnancy. Taken the firstborn at birth," Rylan finished, his face a grim sculpture. The strategy was monstrous, brilliant. 2 weapons, one to send into the wild to detonate, the other to keep and mold. Where would he keep a pup? Not the main lodge, somewhere close, somewhere he could control. The Eastern Ridge. The old mine shafts. Her own tactical information, now a map to her stolen child. The irony was a bitter pill. A Blood Moon warrior broke through the line, his axe aimed at Rylan's back. Sienna didn't think. A whip crack of heat, no wider than a finger, lashed from her palm. It wasn't the wild inferno of the basin. It was focused, sharp. It seared across the warrior's wrist. He screamed, dropping his axe, his fur smoking. Rylan pivoted and finished him with a brutal slash of his claws, then shot Sienna a look that was part gratitude, part stark terror at her control. "The tunnels," Sienna said, her mind clicking into a cold, strategic gear she didn't know she possessed. "We need to disengage. They're fighting each other as much as us." As if to prove her point, a Silverfang wolf went down under the combined teeth of 2 Blood Moon beasts. Lucas was bellowing orders, trying to rally his men against this new enemy, but his gaze kept darting to Sienna with a possessiveness that made her skin crawl. Rylan gave a sharp, piercing whistle, a retreat signal. His rogues began to fall back in practiced unison, covering each other, melting toward the deep tunnel entrance. Mara was already gone, the precious bundle of Sienna's sun vanished into the mountain's heart. "We can't let them follow," Sienna shouted over the din. "We won't," Rylan growled. He pointed to the burning shelter. "Can you bring it down? The entrance is beneath the overhang." She understood, bury the door. She looked at the fire, feeling its chaotic energy. It was hungry, consuming. She reached for it with her mind, not to command it, but to ask, to guide. She exhaled, and the flame seemed to lean toward her. With a wrenching mental pull, she directed the core of the heat into the central support beam of the shelter's stone and timber frame. Groan. Crack. The beam, superheated, snapped. The roof collapsed in a cascade of fire and stone, crashing down directly in front of the tunnel entrance, sealing it with a roaring, fiery barricade. The battling wolves fell back from the intense heat. The last thing Sienna saw was Lucas's enraged face, and the Blood Moon commander's calculating stare through the wall of flame before Rylan pulled her into the dark, cool safety of a secondary passage. The sounds of battle muffled, replaced by the drip of water, their ragged breaths, and the distant, terrified cries of the Enclave's non-combatants deeper within the mountain. The air smelled of damp stone and fear. They stumbled into a wider cavern, a makeshift infirmary where the wounded from the initial attack were being treated. Mara was there, rocking the now sleeping infant. Sienna rushed to them, her hands trembling as she checked her son, needing the solid, whole proof of him. "He is unharmed," Mara said, her flinty eyes soft for a moment. Then they hardened as they landed on Rylan. "The Blood Moon pack knows our location. The seal will not hold them long. They will find another way in or wait us out. We are besieged," Rylan paced, a caged predator. "Lucas has my nephew or niece," he said, the word nephew tasting foreign and foul. "He has a piece of her inside his walls. That is his anchor. That is his weakness." Sienna looked up from her son's face. "He said the child knows no other father. He's raising it as his heir." The thought was more sickening than any physical wound. "We have to get them out, before they're lost forever." A rogue, his arm bandaged, approached. Alpha, the deep stores are secure, but the western air shaft we heard digging, from above. The Blood Moon Pack. They were already searching, exploiting the mountain's vulnerabilities. Time was a noose, tightening from two directions. Rylan stopped pacing. He looked at Sienna, a profound, weary understanding passing between them. The Brotherhood, the stolen child, the two enemy packs, it was a tangled knot. But one thread was clear. "He wants a war of annihilation," Rylan said quietly. "He sent you to me to start it. He kept your firstborn to guarantee it. Because if I come for the child, I lead my pack into the heart of his territory. A direct assault on a fortified pack. Stronghold is suicide." "So we don't assault," Sienna said, the idea forming even as she spoke it. "We don't give him the war he expects." "What do you propose?" Mara asked, skepticism etched in her voice. Sienna stood, placing her sleeping son gently back into Mara's care. She faced Rylan, the mate bond that wasn't, the ally, the father of her children. "He thinks he holds all the power. He has my child. He has his pack. He has a political mate and the authority of an alpha." She took a step closer, her voice dropping. "But you know his territory. You were raised there, and I know his mind. I know the lies he tells, the shortcuts he takes, the rot he hides. The Eastern Ridge shafts are a weakness, yes, but the real weakness is him." Rylan's eyes gleamed in the torchlight. "A surgical strike, not an army, a blade." "Two blades," Sienna corrected. "You and me." "Impossible," Mara interjected. "You are not a warrior. You have power, but you are untrained, and you have just given birth." "I am a mother whose child was stolen," Sienna said, and the truth of it forged a steel in her spine that no training could ever provide. "And my power is the one thing his strategy didn't account for me controlling. He wanted a bomb. He's getting a scalpel." The sound of distant, rhythmic pounding echoed down the tunnel, the Blood Moon Pack digging closer. Rylan held Sienna's gaze for a long, tense moment. He was weighing it all, the risk, the madness, the slim chance. Finally, he gave a single, sharp nod. "We go alone, fast and quiet, through the high passes. It will take 2 days of hard travel." "Then we leave now," Sienna said, already turning to gather a water skin and a spare cloak. "Sienna," Rylan's voice stopped her. He moved closer, his presence a solid warmth in the cold cavern. His hand came up not to grab, but to hover near her cheek. "If we do this, you will have to see him. You will have to walk back into that den. You will have to use everything you learned as his omega to betray him. Can you do that?" She thought of the humiliation, the whispered insults, the final, cold order of exile. She thought of a tiny, unknown child living a lie in the heart of it all. The fear was there, a cold pool in her gut. But beneath it, hotter and brighter, was the fire. "For my child," she said, her voice unwavering, "I can do worse." A grim, approving smile touched Rylan's lips. It was the most terrifying expression she had ever seen on him. "Then we move. Mara, you hold the mountain. Keep them digging at the western shaft. Make noise. Let them think we're all trapped here." Mara looked between them, her jaw tight. Finally, she bowed her head. "Bring the lost pup home, Alpha." Minutes later, Sienna stood at a hidden exit, a narrow crack in the mountain's face concealed by a frozen waterfall. The world outside was a moonlit tableau of snow and shadow. The sounds of the two enemy packs, one digging, the other likely regrouping, were faint murmurs on the wind. Rylan shifted beside her, his wolf form a massive, dark shape of lethal grace. He nudged a small pack toward her with his nose. Supplies. She secured it, took one last, deep breath of the safe, enclosed air, and then followed him out into the freezing night. They moved like ghosts, two shadows against the snow, leaving the siege and the safety of the pack behind. The path led upward, toward the treacherous, wind-scoured peaks that formed the jagged border between the Blackwood and Silverfang territory. Sienna's muscles burned, her body still healing, but she pushed on, driven by a phantom cry only she could hear. As they climbed above the tree line, the wind howling a dirge around them, Rylan paused on a rocky outcrop. Below, in the distance, the lights of the Silverfang main lodge glittered like false stars in the valley. "Home," Rylan whispered, the word a curse. Sienna stared at those lights, her heart a drum of dread and determination. Somewhere in that web of warmth and lies was her flesh and blood. The plan was simple, Infiltrate, find, extract. But a cold doubt whispered to her as the wind ripped at her cloak. What if the child doesn't want to be found? The doubt asked. What if, after all this time, they belong to the monster? She shoved the thought away. It didn't matter. She was coming. And she would burn his perfect, poisonous world to the ground to get her baby back. But as they began their descent toward the Silverfang heartland, Sienna couldn't shake the feeling that Lucas was waiting for them. That the stolen child was not just a prize, but a trap. And that the deepest secret of all was not who had taken her firstborn, but what her firstborn had become in her absence. The hidden crack behind the frozen waterfall sealed, shut behind them with a sigh of settling snow. The roar of the battle in the enclave vanished, replaced by the hollow, keening wind of the high passes. Sienna's last sight had been Mara's flinty eyes, holding hers for a heartbeat before turning back to the barricaded tunnel. Bring the lost pup home. The words were a brand on her soul, hotter than any flame she could summon. Keep moving. Ryland's voice was a low rasp, barely audible over the gale. The cold will kill faster than any arrow up here. He was a shadow against the blinding white, leading the way across a spine of rock so narrow they had to move in single file. The wind scoured them, a physical force that stole breath and threatened balance. Sienna clutched the sling holding her son to her chest, the tiny weight beneath the furs her only anchor to warmth, to purpose. I'm coming, she thought, not for the pup at her breast, but for the one whose face she had never seen. The phantom child Lucas had stolen. The knowledge was a constant, sickening pull in her gut, a compass needle pointing towards Silverfang. They traversed in silence for hours, the world reduced to the next foothold, the next gust to brace against. Sienna's mind, however, raced over the map Rylan had sketched in the soot of the cave floor before they left. The high passes are watched, but not like the borders below, he'd said, his finger tracing a line above the tree line. Lucas will expect an army at his gates, not two ghosts on his roof. We dropped down behind the eastern ridge, near the old mine shafts. The rotting tooth, Sienna had whispered, remembering her own intelligence. Rylan had nodded, a grim approval in his eyes. His weakness given by you, we'll use it. Now, as they began a treacherous descent, the wind finally easing, the reality of the plan felt like madness. 2 against an entire pack. A rogue alpha and a half-breed omega with a newborn and a spark of fire. If only I had known, she thought, the old refrain taking new meaning. If only I'd known what he took from me, I would have burned his world down the day he exiled me. Down here, Rylan gestured to a fissure in the cliff face, half hidden by a curtain of ice. The air from within smelled of damp stone and ancient cold. It connects to the upper tunnels of the mine network. It's unstable, quiet as death. He went first, melting into the darkness. Sienna followed, the sudden absence of wind a shock. The only sounds were their careful footfalls, the drip of distant water, and the soft, sleeping breaths of her son. The tunnel was a natural chimney, angling steeply downward. They climbed down using jagged outcrops as handholds, the darkness so complete Sienna felt it as a pressure on her skin. After an eternity of descent, Rylan stopped. His hand found her arm in the dark, a firm, grounding touch. Listen! She strained her ears. At first, nothing. Then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of voices echoing through the stone. They were deep within Silverfang territory. Patrols doubled on the southern tree line. The Alpha expects the rogue's main force to hit there, a young, bored voice said. While we get to babysit this dank hole, a second, deeper voice grumbled. Nothing's coming through these collapsed tunnels. Waste of time. Sienna's pulse hammered. Guards, at the mine entrance. Ryland's grip tightened, then he leaned so close his lips brushed her ear, his whisper a vibration in the dark. 2. Standard sentry post. They're complacent. What do we do? She breathed back. We remind them why this place is a weakness. His voice held a lethal calm. You wait here, do not move, do not make a sound. Before she could protest, he was gone, a ripple of displaced air the only sign of his movement. Sienna pressed herself against the cold wall, one hand over her sling, her heart a frantic drum. She heard the scuff of boots on stone, a yawn. Then, a sound that froze her blood, a low, guttural snarl that didn't sound entirely wolf. It echoed through the tunnels, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was the sound of the Blackwood-given voice. What in the moon's name was that? The bored voice was bored no longer. Probably a rockfall in the deep shafts, the deeper voice said, but uncertainty tinged his words. Stay at your post. I'll take a quick look down this side tunnel. Signal if you see anything. Don't go far. Footsteps receded. One guard leaving, Sienna held her breath. A minute passed. Then a choked gasp, cut brutally short, echoed faintly up the passage. It was followed by a soft, wet thud. Silence. The remaining guard shifted nervously, his armor creaking. Joran, you all right? Joran? No answer. Sienna heard the sheeing of a blade being drawn. The guard's breathing became ragged, loud in the stagnant air. He took a step away from his post, then another, peering into the darkness where his companion had vanished. This isn't funny. From the shadows directly behind the man, Rylan materialized. Not as a wolf, but as a man-shaped avalanche of silent fury. One arm snaked around the guard's throat, the other clamping over his mouth. There was a brief, terrible struggle, a muffled gurgle, then the sickening crack of bone. The guard went limp. Rylan lowered the body to the ground without a sound. He turned toward Sienna's hiding place and gestured. Come. She emerged, her eyes avoiding the two dark shapes on the tunnel floor. The metallic scent of blood was sharp in the air. Rylan was already wiping his hands on a discarded cloak. The way is clear, but we have minutes, maybe less, before the patrol shift changes. They moved past the sentry post into a wider, worked tunnel, the old mine. Wooden supports, rotten and sagging, lined the walls. The air grew colder. Rylan led with predatory certainty, choosing turns without hesitation. Sienna realized he had memorized this route. He had planned this long before today. You knew you'd come this way someday, she whispered, the realization dawning. I knew I'd kill my brother someday, Rylan corrected, his voice flat. This was always a path to his heart. I just didn't know I'd be using it to rescue my own child. The word "our" hung unspoken between them. The child he hadn't known about. The child she'd been robbed of. It bound them together in this darkness, more surely than any vow. They reached a rusted iron ladder bolted into the stone, leading up to a wooden hatch. Rylan climbed first, put his shoulder to it, and pushed with a controlled heave. The hatch opened with a groan of protesting hinges, letting in a flood of cold, clean night air and the faint, distant sounds of the Silverfang Lodge. The clang of a smithy, a raised voice, the howl of a patrol wolf far below. Rylan slipped out, then reached down to help Sienna up. They emerged in a shadowed alcove behind the lodge's main kitchen midden, a heap of discarded bones and ash. The grand timbered bulk of Alpha Lucas's home loomed above them, windows glowing with warm, golden light. The heart of the pack that had cast her out to die. From their vantage, they could see the main courtyard. It was a hive of frantic activity. Warriors assembled, weapons were distributed, and officers barked orders. Lucas was preparing for a full-scale war on the Enclave. He believed Rylan and his forces were trapped, besieged. He had no idea the two greatest threats were already inside his walls. The nursery wing is on the second floor, east corner, Sienna murmured, the layout of her former prison etched in her memory. He'll have the child close. He thinks of it as his weapon. Rylan's eyes scanned the fortress, calculating. Too many eyes. We need a diversion, not an attack, a distraction. His gaze landed on the large, low building to the west, smoke billowing from its chimneys, the armory and forge. Can you do it? A small fire, contained. Just enough to pull the guards from the lodge, not enough to bring the whole pack down on us. Sienna looked at the forge, then at her hands. She remembered the training basin, the single, controlled flame in her palm, the burning shelter she had collapsed with precision. She nodded, a fierce certainty hardening within her. Yes. Good. I'll get to the nursery. You light the fuse, then get to the eastern tree line. There's a lightning-struck oak. Wait for me there. He caught her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. The intensity in them was terrifying. Do not engage. Do not be seen. You are the spark, not the inferno. Not yet. He was asking her to trust him with the rescue. To separate. The thought sent a bolt of pure fear through her, but she saw the logic. He was faster, stronger, deadlier. And she was the only one who could create the distraction they needed without raising an alarm. She nodded again, her throat tight. Ryland's thumb brushed her cheek, a shockingly gentle gesture. Go. He melted into the deeper shadows, heading for a servant's entrance she couldn't even see. Sienna took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the cool night air fill her lungs. She focused on the forge, on the heat she could sense even from here, the ripe, ready fuel for her power. She called upon the strange, deep well inside her, not the panicked, eruptive fury, but the focused intent she had learned. A spark. Just a spark. She held out her hand, palm facing the distant, slatted vents of the forge's wood store. She thought of a single ember popping from a fire. She pushed. Nothing happened for 3 heartbeats. Then a brilliant orange glow flared behind the vents. A moment later, a shout of alarm rang out. Fire! The wood store! Chaos erupted. Guards abandoned their posts, running toward the forge with buckets. Voices shouted for water. The orderly war preparations dissolved into frantic emergency. Sienna saw warriors streaming from the lodge's main doors, Lucas's Beta, Kale among them, barking orders. It was working. She turned and ran, keeping to the shadows, a wraith in the night. She reached the eastern tree line. The lightning struck Oka's stark, skeletal silhouette against the starry sky. She pressed herself against its charred bark, her eyes fixed on the nursery windows, now dark and silent. Hurry, she begged silently. Minutes stretched, each one in agony. The commotion at the forge grew louder. Then she saw him. A massive, dark shape dropped from a second-story balcony, landing in a crouch on the ground. He held a bundled blanket close to his chest. Rylan. He was across the courtyard in a blur, a shadow among shadows. He was almost to the tree line when a figure stepped out from behind a storage shed, directly into his path. Alara. The Luna stood there, wrapped in a silver fur cloak, her face pale and severe in the moonlight. She wasn't armed. She simply stared at Rylan, then at the bundle in his arms. Her expression was unreadable. Sienna's breath caught. Sound the alarm, she thought. Scream. But Alara did not scream. She looked from the stolen child to the burning forge, then back to Rylan. Her lips moved, her voice too low for Sienna to hear. Rylan stopped, his body coiled like a spring. He said something short, sharp. Alara hesitated. Then slowly she inclined her head. Not a bow, but an acknowledgement. She stepped aside, clearing the path to the trees. Rylan didn't wait. He shot past her and into the forest's edge, reaching Sienna's side in seconds. He thrust the bundle into her arms. Go, now. The whole pack will be on us in seconds. Sienna looked down. Swaddled in fine Silverfang wool was a pup. A little girl. She had a dusting of dark hair, and even in sleep, her features held a striking, familiar blend of Sienna's own mouth and Ryland's strong brow. A sob tore from Sienna's throat. Her daughter, her daughter. A howl of pure, incandescent rage split the night from the direction of the lodge. It was Lucas. He knew. Run! Ryland commanded, shifting in a burst of sinew and fur into his enormous, scarred black wolf. He nudged her urgently. Sienna clutched her daughter to one arm, her son to the other, and ran into the dark woods, Rylan a protective shadow at her side. The sounds of pursuit erupted behind them. Howls, shouts, the crash of bodies through undergrowth. They had the children. They had their prize. But as they fled toward the supposed safety of the high passes, Sienna's mind reeled with one burning, unanswered question. A question that would change everything. Why had Alara let them go? Lucas's howl of pure, undiluted rage tore through the night behind them, a sound that promised annihilation. It was the sound of a plan shattered, a possession stolen. Sienna clutched her daughter tighter against her chest, the little boy secure in the sling at her back, and ran as if the forest itself were trying to reclaim her. Thump, thump, thump. Her heart was a war drum in her ears, syncing with the frantic rhythm of her boots on the frozen ground. Rylan was a dark shadow ahead, a silent guide weaving through the skeletal trees. The cold air burned her lungs, but the heat inside her, the fire she now carried with purpose, thrummed in response to the panic, a banked coal threatening to flare. Faster, Rylan growled, not looking back. He'll send the entire Eastern Patrol. They know this land. If only I had known what Alara's silence truly meant, Sienna thought, the memory of the Luna's unreadable eyes in the torchlight haunting her steps. It had been a gift, a miracle. But in the world of alphas, miracles were just weapons yet to be named. They reached the lightning-struck oak, the rendezvous point, and Rylan didn't pause. He angled north, away from the direct route back to the high passes. "We're being herded," he hissed. "Lucas will expect us to run for the mountains. We go through the Deadfalls." The Deadfalls? A tangled, briar-choked section of the border where ancient trees had collapsed into a natural maze. It was slower, more dangerous, but unpredictable. A chorus of answering howls erupted to the east and south. Closer. They were already flanking. "Give me the girl," Rylan said, stopping suddenly behind a massive, mossy log. "You're carrying both. You can't run and fight. Give her to me." His voice brooked no argument, but his hands, as he reached for the bundled infant, were careful. He settled his daughter inside his own heavy furs, against the scarred wall of his chest. The act was so profoundly paternal it stole Sienna's breath for a second. "Now, your fire, can you use it? Not a blast. A wall, a barrier of heat and fear." Sienna swallowed, looking back the way they'd come. She could hear the crunch of purposeful footsteps now, the snap of branches. A hunting party moving fast. "I can try. Do more than try." He met her eyes. In the gloom, his gaze was all alpha, all commander. "You are not a distraction now. You are the rear guard. Make them hesitate." He melted into the shadows of the Deadfalls with the children. Sienna was alone. The sounds drew nearer. She placed her hands on the cold, damp bark of a fallen hemlock. She closed her eyes, not seeking the wild, desperate inferno that had consumed the bear or the focused jet that had lit the forge. She sought the memory of the training basin. The single, dancing flame on her palm. She breathed in the scent of pine and decay and breathed out the scent of sun-baked stone and kindling. "Come on," she begged the hidden ember inside. Not destruction, deterrence. She pushed the feeling outward, not as a projectile, but as a field. Heat radiated from her palms into the wood. Steam began to rise with a faint, persistent hiss. The wet moss on the log dried and browned in seconds. Further out, the hoarfrost on the underbrush melted, dripping like sudden rain. The first Silverfang warrior emerged from the trees, a hulking male with a spear. He pulled up short, nostrils flaring. "Smoke!" His companion, a female with a bow, whispered, coming up beside him. It wasn't smoke. It was the air itself, wavering with heat. A wall of it, 6 feet high and 20 feet wide, shimmering between them and Sienna's position. The fallen log at its center began to smolder, orange lines crawling through the soaked bark. "What in the moon's name?" the male muttered, taking a step back. Sienna poured more of herself into it. The log cracked, and a small, hungry flame burst to life. Then another. The wall of heat intensified, pushing the hunters back a step, then two. It was an impossibility in the frozen woods, a defiance of nature. It spoke of a power they did not understand. "It's her," the female archer said, nocking an arrow but not drawing. "The Omega, the Fire Witch." "Do not call her that," a cold, familiar voice ordered. Cale stepped from the brush, his face a mask of grim fury. He assessed the fiery barrier, his eyes finding Sienna's through the shimmering air. He saw her control, her defiance. Ryland's message had been delivered. "She is not your victim anymore." "She can't hold it forever," Cale stated, but he didn't advance. "Archers, loose through the heat, disrupt her." The female archer drew, aiming high to arc over the flames. Sienna flinched, her concentration wavering. The wall of heat flickered. A snarl ripped through the night, and a massive, charcoal-gray wolf launched from the thicket beside Cale. Rylan. He doubled back. His jaws closed on the archer's forearm before the arrow could fly, a bone-crunching snap followed by a scream. He whirled, a blur of fang and muscle, and slammed into the spearman, sending him flying into a tree. Cale shifted in a ripple of anger, meeting Rylan wolf to wolf. They were a cyclone of snapping jaws and raking claws. "Go, Sienna. Now." Rylan's command was a guttural roar in her mind. The wall of fire collapsed as she broke her concentration. She turned and fled deep into the labyrinth of the Deadfalls, following the mental pull of the mate bond she now recognized for what it was. Not the false, sweet pull she'd felt with Lucas, but a raw, resonant tether of shared purpose and fury. The sounds of the brutal fight behind her faded, replaced by the thick, suffocating silence of the dead forest. She ran until a stitch screamed in her side, until the howls were distant echoes. She found a hollow beneath a root tangle, reeking of old earth, and crawled in, shaking. Minutes bled by. The only sound was her ragged breath and the soft, sleeping sighs of her son. A shadow blocked the faint moonlight. She tensed, a spark heating her fingertips. "It's me!" Ryland's human voice was rough with pain. He crouched, sliding into the hollow. He was bleeding from a deep gash across his ribs, and his left arm hung at an awkward angle. But in his good arm, he still cradled their daughter, safe and undisturbed. Kale's retreating with his wounded. Bought us time, not a path. "Your arm, dislocated, help me." The procedure was brutal and swift. He bit down on a leather-wrapped knife as she pulled with all her strength, a sickening pop receding the joint. He didn't cry out, but sweat beaded on his brow. In the close, dark space, their breathing mingled. "The children?" he asked, his voice tight. "Asleep. They're resilient." She looked at the tiny face peeking from his furs, then at the boy against her own heart. "We have them both." Ryland nodded, a profound exhaustion in the gesture. But his eyes were alive, scanning the darkness outside their hide. "Lucas won't let this stand. He'll come himself now. The theft of the child," he corrected, the word daughter still seeming foreign, "is a blow he cannot absorb. He'll be unhinged." "Elara," Sienna whispered. "Why did she let us go?" Ryland was silent for a long moment. Loyalty in a political mating is a thin thread. Perhaps she saw his obsession for what it is. Perhaps she has her own reasons to want him weakened. He shifted, wincing. Or perhaps it's a deeper play. We cannot trust it. We can only use the time it gave us. He leaned his head back against the dirt wall. "We need to move at first light. Get to the high passes. The Enclave will be waiting." "Ryland," Sienna said, the question that had gnawed at her since the lodge finally breaking free. "What did you see? In the nursery? Was she cared for?" His jaw tightened. She was in a carved crib, warm, well-fed, adorned like a prize. He met her eyes, and the horror in his was fresh. There was a name etched into the wood. Lyra. Lyra, a beautiful name, a name chosen by Lucas. It made the theft feel even more intimate, more violating. "And on the wall," Ryland continued, his voice dropping to a bare whisper, "a symbol was painted, the same one that was on the pendant he returned to you. The crescent moon cradling a flame. The mark of the blood moon pack. He wasn't just hiding her heritage from you," Ryland said. "He was cultivating it, branding her with it. For what purpose?" A cold deeper than the Blackwood winter seeped into Sienna's bones. The pieces were aligning into a picture more terrifying than she had imagined. Lucas hadn't just stolen a child to hurt her. He had a plan for Lyra. A plan tied to the very pack that wanted Sienna dead. Dawn came, gray and silent. They moved like ghosts through the deadfalls, then began the arduous climb into the high passes. The wind here was a razor, scouring the rock bare. Sienna's muscles burned. But the sight of Ryland ahead, a child secured against him, his dislocated arm still clearly painful but ignored, gave her strength. They were halfway up a treacherous scree slope when the sound reached them. Not a howl, a horn, a deep, mournful brass note that echoed between the peaks. It was not a Silverfang sound. Ryland froze. "Blood moon," he spat. From the opposite ridge, figures appeared. Not a small contingent. A column. 30, 40 warriors, moving with disciplined speed, cutting off the route to the Enclave. At their head was the tall, scarred commander with the iron-braided beard. And beside him, held by 2 warriors, was a figure Sienna recognized with a jolt Mara. The elder's face was bloodied, but her head was high. The blood moon horn blew again. The commander's voice, amplified by the rocks, boomed across the pass. "Ryland, you hold what does not belong to you. The aberration is ours by right of blood and law. Give us the human-born witch and her get, and your people in the valley below may yet live." Sienna's breath caught. The Enclave, they were already at the Enclave. Ryland stepped forward, placing himself between Sienna and the ridge. "You have one of mine, Borak," he shouted back, his voice carrying on the wind. "Release her and we can speak of terms." The commander, Borak, laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Terms? You have no terms. Look behind you." Sienna turned. Down in the tree line at the base of the pass, Silverfang warriors were emerging. Lucas stood at their forefront, in human form, his face a calm mask of triumph. He was looking not at Ryland, but directly at Sienna. He held up a single object. It glinted in the weak sun, her mother's pendant. He had brought it, a reminder, a claim. They were trapped. Blood moon above, Silverfang below. The enclave was under siege. Mara was a prisoner. And the children, Ryland's hand found Sienna's shoulder, his grip iron. "Stay behind me!" But his eyes were calculating, desperate. There was no clear path, no clever tactic for this. What happened next changed everything. From the highest pinnacle of rock above them all, a figure appeared, robes whipping in the wind. The seer. His voice, thin and ancient yet carrying an unnatural weight, rang out, stopping both advancing forces in their tracks. "The flame has split. The weapon is doubled," he cried, pointing a bony finger not at Sienna but at the bundle in Ryland's arms. At Lyra. "You seek the mother's fire, but you are blind. The daughter carries the true spark, the dormant sun. He who controls the daughter controls the dawn, and he who bred this line knew." A stunned silence gripped the pass. Sienna's world tilted. The daughter carries the true spark. Lucas's triumphant mask shattered into sudden, visceral panic. He hadn't just wanted a weapon to raise. He had been trying to control the stronger weapon. And the seer's final words, "He who bred this line knew." Before Sienna could process it, Ryland's head snapped toward her, his own eyes wide with a dawning, horrific realization. "Sienna," he breathed, the battle, the armies forgotten. "Your father, Corin. What pack did he flee from?" "The Blood Moon," she whispered, the truth crashing down like an avalanche. "He fled the Blood Moon Alpha." The seer's voice shrieked one last, devastating truth across the mountains, a truth that rewrote every lie, every betrayal, every moment of her life. "The Blood Moon Alpha is not your hunter, child of Lyanna. He is your grandsire, and he has come to claim his royal blood." The seer's words hung in the frozen air, a truth more shattering than any weapon. Grandfather, royal blood. Sienna's mind reeled, the high pass winds screaming a new, terrible history into her ears. Below, Lucas's Silverfang forces were a dark stain on the snow. Above, Borak's Blood Moon warriors stood like iron statues, their amber eyes fixed on her, or rather, on the bundle in Ryland's arms. "He doesn't want to cull you, girl," Borak's voice boomed down, thick with a grim triumph. "He wants to crown you. Your father, Corin, was his son and heir. Your mother's aberration was a stain he sought to cleanse. But the bloodline is the bloodline. You, and the child you hold, belong to the Blood Moon Peak." Ryland's growl was a low, continuous thunder. He shifted, putting his body between Sienna and the cliff face above. "She belongs to no one," he snarled, but the statement was a defiance, not a fact. The ground had just fallen away beneath their entire war. Mara, held tightly by a Blood Moon warrior, met Sienna's gaze. The elder's face was a mask of stoic fury, but her eyes flashed a warning. "Think." Lucas's voice, amplified by the bowl of the pass, cut through from below. "An entertaining story, Borak, but the child is in my territory, born of my pack. Your claim is a dusty relic." His tone was slick, but Sienna heard the frantic edge beneath it. The seer had exposed his prize. He hadn't just stolen a weapon, he'd stolen a royal heir, and now the original dynasty had come to collect. "She carries the true spark," the seer intoned from his perch, his voice carrying unnaturally. "The fire sleeps in the daughter. In the mother it is a wild river. In the child it is the sun itself, waiting for dawn. The Alpha of Blood Moon would harness it. The Alpha of Silverfang would pretend to own it. Both would break it to their will. The sun itself." Sienna looked at Lyra's small, sleeping face, barely visible in the furs. Her daughter. A power even she couldn't comprehend. A prize for monsters. "What is your command, Borak?" a Blood Moon warrior called. The scarred commander stared down, his gaze calculating. "The Alpha's order is clear. The royal blood returns. The half-breed and her spawn alive. The rogue," he said, his eyes flicking to Rylan with disdain, "is chaff. Burn it." "They're going to attack both ways at once," Rylan muttered, his voice for Sienna alone. His eyes scanned the pass, the narrow, defensible choke point they occupied, the sheer walls. "Lucas will charge the slope to get the girl. Borak will come down to take her. We're the meat in the grindstone." "We can't fight two armies," Sienna breathed, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. No, Rylan agreed, his mind working with a terrifying, icy clarity. We don't fight them, we make them fight each other. He looked at her, his gaze sharp. You said you could control it now, the fire. Not just make it, but guide it. A cold dread pooled in her stomach. Small. I can guide small flames. A torch, a campfire. What about a signal fire? He asked, nodding toward a precarious pile of ancient, dry timber nestled against the cliff face further down the pass, a place where travelers had once taken shelter. It was directly between their position and Lucas's advancing front line. A big, obvious, undeniable one, right in Lucas's path. Understanding dawned, horrific and brilliant. You want me to light it, to draw the blood moon down onto him. They want Lyra. He's between them and her. They'll see the fire, see his force moving, and they'll have to engage. It's their only shot before he retreats with his prize. Rylan's hand gripped her arm. Can you do it? From here? The distance was too far. She'd never thrown a spark that distance, not with any control. She shook her head, panic rising. I can't reach it. Then you get closer, he said, as if proposing a stroll. I'll draw their eyes. You go down the scree slope to that lower outcrop. He pointed to a jumble of rocks 50 yards down and to the left, shrouded in morning shadow. From there you can touch it, light it and run back, I'll cover you. It was suicide. A slow, exposed scramble down loose rock under the gaze of 2 armies. They'll see me. They'll kill me. Not if they're looking at me, Rylan said, and a fierce, wild grin touched his lips. It was the grin of the rogue king, the monster of the Blackwood. I'm going to give them a show. Before she could protest, he shoved Lyra's carrying sling securely across her chest over her own son. Keep them safe. That's the mission. Now go. The moment I move, you move. Don't think. Just run and burn. He turned, took a deep breath, and then he roared. It wasn't just a challenge. It was a seismic event, a blast of pure alpha fury that echoed off the stone walls, momentarily drowning out the wind. Every eye on the pass snapped to him. Lucas, Rylan bellowed, taking 3 long, deliberate strides out into the open center of the pass, a lone figure against the snow. You wanted a war, brother. You wanted to prove you were the stronger son. Well, here I am. No pack to hide behind, no politics to play. Just you and me. Or are you still the coward who sends pregnant women to do his dirty work? The silence that followed was profound. On the slope below, the Silverfang advance halted. Lucas stood at its forefront, his face a mask of cold rage. Above, the Blood Moon warriors watched, intrigued by the spectacle. This was it, her cue. Sienna turned and scrambled over the edge of the outcrop, sliding down the steep, unstable scree on her backside, stones clattering and giving way beneath her. The noise was masked by the ringing aftermath of Rylan's shout and the sudden, answering roar of fury from Lucas. You are nothing, Lucas screamed back, his composure shattered. A blight our father should have scrubbed from the earth. That child is mine. Her power is mine to shape. Your father saw your poison, Rylan taunted, walking slowly, deliberately, parallel to Sienna's hidden descent, drawing all attention. He saw your weakness. He cast you out long before you had the spine to cast me out. You're not an alpha. You're a thief playing dress-up in a dead man's furs. Sienna reached the lower outcrop, her breath sobbing in her lungs, her hands scraped raw. She peered over the rock. The timber pile was there, 20 yards away across a flat, exposed stretch. Too far, still too far. She closed her eyes, reaching for the cold, moon-touched place inside her where the fire lived. It surged in response to her fear, her desperation, a torrent begging to be unleashed. No, not a flood. A thread. A single, focused thread. She opened her eyes, extended a trembling hand, and pulled. On the timber, a single, dry twig at the very top smoldered. Then a wisp of smoke curled up. It was pathetic, useless. Above, the confrontation was escalating. Lucas had shifted, a massive, silver-furred wolf bristling with rage. Rylan stood his ground in human form, a deliberate insult. Shift, brother, Lucas snarled, his voice a guttural distortion. Face me as what you are. I face you as what I am, Rylan shot back. A man, you're just a beast. With a shriek of fury, Lucas launched himself up the slope, and from the cliffs, Borek gave a sharp, barking order. Down. Take the royal blood. Engage Silverfang. The Blood Moon warriors began their descent, a cascade of dark bodies and glinting steel. Time was up. The two forces were moving, but they would converge on Rylan, not on each other. Her signal had failed. Despair choked her. Then a memory flashed, her mother's voice, faint and dreamlike. "The fire isn't in the wood, my heart. It's in the air around it. It's everywhere. You just have to ask it to gather." She wasn't trying to light the wood. She was trying to light the air. Sienna stopped trying to push the fire out. Instead, she invited it. She focused on the space above the timber pile, the cold, thin mountain air. She imagined it thickening, growing eager, becoming a lens for the sun's distant heat and the frantic energy of her own blood. A spark, not from her, but from the atmosphere itself, flickered into existence. Then another, a dozen. They danced like amber fireflies, then swirled, coalescing whoosh. The entire pile erupted in a column of flame 10 feet high, hot and roaring and impossibly sudden. It wasn't the wild, explosive conflagration of her rage. It was a controlled, deliberate beacon, a blazing declaration of war placed perfectly in the no-man's land between the two forces. The effect was instantaneous. Lucas's charging Silverfangs skidded to a halt, confronted by a wall of heat. The descending Blood Moon warriors, seeing their path to the child now blocked by both fire and their rival pack, redirected their charge with a unified howl. Their target was no longer the outcrop. It was Lucas's flank. Chaos erupted. The two armies collided not at Rylan's feet, but 30 yards down the pass, a roaring, snarling melee of wolf and human forms, steel and tooth. The plan had worked. Sienna sagged against the rock, stunned by her own success. She had done it. She had controlled it. A shadow fell over her. Rylan dropped down beside her, his chest heaving. "Now," he grabbed her arm. While they're tangled up and out, the high root behind the crest, they scrambled back up the scree, this time together, clawing their way to the relative safety of the upper pass. Behind and below, the battle raged, the sounds of combat mingling with the crackle of her fire. They ran, not down toward the enclave, but up along a narrow, icy goat track that traced the mountain's shoulder, away from the slaughter. After a mile of breathless, silent running, Rylan pulled her into a shallow cave, little more than a crack in the rock. They were safe for a moment. The babies, miraculously, had slept through it all. Rylan leaned against the wall, watching her. The wild grin was gone, replaced by an unreadable intensity. "You asked the air to burn," he stated. I think so," she panted, the awe of it still upon her. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "My father had a saying. There are weapons you forge and weapons you find. The forged ones are predictable. The found ones, they change the world." He looked at the sleeping infants between them. "I thought Lucas had found a weapon in you. I was wrong." Sienna met his gaze, exhausted, terrified, but thrumming with a new, fragile power. "He didn't find a weapon, Sienna," Rylan said, his voice low. "He found a queen, and he was too much of a coward to know what to do with you." The words should have felt grandiose, absurd. But after what she had just done, after the seer's proclamation, they felt like a chilling premonition. She wasn't just a pawn or a weapon or a lost heir. She was something else entirely, and the path ahead was darker and more vast than she had ever imagined. Outside their tiny shelter, the wind carried the distant cries of the dying battle. But from much further away, from the direction of the deepest, highest mountains to the west, a new sound echoed. A deep, resonant, and ancient howl that was not a challenge, but a summons. It was answered by another, and then another from peaks they could not see. Rylan went utterly still, his head cocked, all the color drained from his face. "What is that?" Sienna whispered, the sound vibrating in her very bones. Rylan's eyes were wide with something she had never seen in them before, primal fear. "That," he breathed, "is the Blood Moon Alpha. He's not waiting for an emissary's report anymore." He looked at her, and then at the children. "He's coming himself, and he's bringing the full might of the Western Crags." The cliffside cave no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a trap. The greatest predator of all had just entered the hunt, and his call promised not conquest, but a reckoning. Sienna held her children closer, the flame inside her guttering against a sudden, encroaching frost. The war for territory was over. Now, the war for destiny had begun, and they were trapped on a mountain ledge in the middle of it. The howl died, but its echo lived in Sienna's bones. It wasn't a sound, it was a command written in the ice of the world. The Blood Moon Alpha was coming. For her. Ryland's hand clamped over hers on the cave's cold stone lip. His face was a mask of grim recognition. He's crossed the western crags. He'll be here by nightfall. We can't stay, Sienna breathed, her gaze darting to the bundled infants nestled on a pelt behind them. Lyra slept, her tiny face peaceful, oblivious to the ancient power that hunted her. Her brother, still unnamed in the chaos, snuffled softly. No, Rylan agreed, his voice low and urgent. But we can't go down. Lucas's forces are scattered, not broken. They'll be regrouping. He looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the gray light from the cave mouth. The only path is up, over the summit's spine. It's a route for ghosts and madmen. What happened next changed everything, Sienna whispered, not to him, but to the part of herself that was still a terrified Omega. That part was small now, but it trembled. We stopped being prey, today. A fierce, approving glint sparked in Ryland's eyes. He nodded once sharply. Gather them, we move in 2 minutes. The climb was a vertical hell. The wind over the summit's spine wasn't a gust. It was a solid, screaming wall intent on plucking them from the rock and dashing them into the chasms below. Sienna carried her son in a sling against her chest, her body a shield against the gale. Ryland bore Lyra, his massive form a battering ram against the elements. They communicated in gestures and shared, desperate looks. Handholds were ice-sheathed illusions. Footings crumbled into nothing. Scrape of claw on stone, the shriek of the wind, the frantic beat of her own heart. Sienna's muscles burned, then went numb. Her mind narrowed to a single point. Hold on, move up, do not look down. The world below, the smoldering timber pile, the clashing specks of Silverfang and Blood Moon warriors, became a distant, silent painting. Up here, there was only the mountain and the two of them. After an eternity of white-knuckle descent, they hauled themselves over a jagged lip onto a narrow, wind-scoured plateau. The summit proper loomed above, a fang of black rock against the iron sky. Here, the wind dropped to a mournful sigh. Ryland set Lyra down gently and turned, his chest heaving. He stared back the way they'd come, his nostrils flaring. He's closer. The scent is on the wind now, old blood and cold stone. Sienna sank to her knees, cradling her son, her own exhaustion a weight. We can't outrun him, can we? No, Ryland said, the word final. He turned to face her. We make our stand, not as fugitives, here. He gestured to the plateau. It was a natural arena, bounded by cliffs on 3 sides, with only the treacherous spine they'd climbed as an approach. He will come that way. He'll come alone at first, to claim his prize. He wants me, my blood, my children. The word children was still a dual wonder and terror. He wants what you represent, Ryland corrected, his gaze intense. A return to a purer, harder line, a culling of the weak. You are the lost heir, Sienna. Your daughter is the future he would shape. He will offer you a throne to get her. I don't want a throne. Her voice was raw. I know, he said, and for the first time she heard a thread of something like sorrow in his deep tone. But today you may have to take one, or burn it down. He began to move, gathering loose stones, building a small, crude windbreak for the infants in the lee of the largest cliff. It was an act of profound, heartbreaking futility, a fortress of pebbles. Rylan, she said, watching him. The seer, she said, my daughter carries the true spark, that I'm just the conduit. What does that mean for this, for now? He paused, a fist-sized rock in his hand. It means the fire in your veins is a river. The fire in hers is the sun. Lucas knew. He was trying to raise the sun himself. He looked at Lyra, his expression unreadable. It means when the Blood Moon Alpha comes, he will not just want to take her. He will want to wake her. And that could burn the world. A new, different cold seized Sienna's heart. It wasn't fear for their lives, but fear of her daughter's life, of the destiny coiled within her. No. The only no that matters, Ryland said, straightening, is the one we give him here, with teeth and fire. If only I had known then how deep his own secrets ran. They didn't have to wait long. The wind shifted, carrying a new scent up the spine. Frost-bitten pine, iron, and a deep, musky power that made the wolf in Sienna want to bare its belly in submission. She fought it, standing shoulder to shoulder with Rylan before the tiny stone nest of their children. He appeared not as a blur, but as a deliberate, inevitable force. One moment the spine was empty. The next, he stood at its head on the plateau. The Blood Moon Alpha was old. Not frail, but ancient, like the mountain itself. His hair and beard were white as the high snow, but his frame was unbent, thick with corded muscle beneath worn leathers. His eyes were the pale, chilling blue of glacial ice. He carried no visible weapon. He didn't need one. His presence was a pressure, a silencing of the wind itself. His gaze swept past Rylan as if he were a minor obstruction. It settled on Sienna, and she felt it like a physical touch, assessing, cataloging. "Granddaughter," he said. His voice was a dry avalanche, a rumble from the earth. "You have led a merry chase." Sienna's throat locked. She forced air into her lungs. "I am not your granddaughter. My father fled you." "Corin," the Alpha said, the name a sigh of disappointment. "My soft-hearted son. He fled with his human-born poison. We corrected that error. And now the bloodline returns, purified, powerful." His ice-blue eyes flicked to the windbreak. "Doubly powerful, I am told. Bring the child to me." "No," the word left Sienna's lips, quiet but absolute. For the first time, the Alpha's gaze shifted to Rylan. "Rogue King, you have served a purpose. You kept her alive, you brought her to this place of decision. Your part is over. Stand aside." Rylan didn't speak. He simply took a half-step forward, his body angled, a living wall between the Alpha and Sienna. The ancient Alpha smiled, a crack in a stone face. "The pup has fangs. I admire that. I admired it in your father, too, before his ambitions required pruning." He tilted his head. "You did not know. Lucas is not the only son who inherited a flawed vision. Your father, the former Alpha of Silverfang, dreamed of alliances with the human-born. Of dilution, a sickness of the mind. I showed him the cost. I showed Lucas, when he came to me for strength, what true power requires. He learned the lesson, better than his brother." Sienna felt Rylan go rigid beside her. Brother, their father. The history of their feud wasn't just personal, it was a generational war with this ancient monster as the puppeteer. "You," Rylan growled, the sound vibrating in the stone beneath their feet. "You turned Lucas into this. You gave him the poison for the mate bond, the plan." "I gave him clarity," the Alpha corrected. "He saw the girl's potential. He needed a tool to claim it. I provided the means. The child she carried from the gathering was always the objective. The boy with the rogue was a useful complication, a lever to bring her power to heal." He looked back at Sienna. "And you have blossomed beyond hope, child. The conduit is now a font. Come, bring the spark to me. Rule at my right hand as the heir you were born to be. This outcast rubble is not your kingdom." He extended a hand, not pleading, but expecting. Sienna looked at that hand. She saw the throne he offered. She saw the legacy of culling and blood. She saw her daughter weaponized. She saw Lucas, a broken puppet. She saw Rylan standing alone against the weight of generations. Her fire did not roar, it crystallized. "You're wrong," she said, her voice clear on the thin air. "This rubble is my kingdom." She gestured to Rylan, to the infants, to the vast, wild sky. "He is my king, and I am no one's heir but my own." The Alpha's smile vanished. The temperature on the plateau seemed to drop 10 degrees. "A pity, then I will take the spark from your dead arms." He moved. It was not the swift, brutal clash of wolves. It was a tectonic shift. The Alpha crossed the distance with a speed that defied his size, not toward Sienna, but toward Rylan. He understood. Break the shield, claim the prize. Rylan met him. The impact was a sound like boulders colliding. They were a whirlwind of fur and fury, but it was immediately, terrifyingly clear that Rylan was overmatched. The Blood Moon Alpha fought with an economy of motion that spoke of centuries of violence. A clawed swipe ripped across Rylan's shoulder, spraying crimson on the gray stone. A hammer-blow fist slammed into his ribs. Rylan grunted, giving ground. Sienna's fire surged, a panic response. A whip of flame lashed from her hand toward the Alpha's back. He didn't even turn. A flick of his wrist, a pulse of that crushing, ancient power, and her fire sputtered and died in midair, as if smothered by an invisible blanket. Your parlor tricks are inherited from the weak, girl, the alpha snarled, blocking a savage bite from Rylan and driving a knee into his gut. True power is in the blood, the bone, the will, Rylan staggered. His eyes met Sienna's over the alpha's shoulder. They were full of pain, but also a fierce, unyielding signal. The plan. The only plan. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to position. With a roar that was more defiance than strength, Rylan wrapped his arms around the alpha in a crushing bear hug, using all his weight and failing strength to drive them backward, toward the cliff edge at the plateau's far side. The alpha bellowed in outrage, his own power flaring. Sienna felt the wave of it, a suffocating dominance that made her knees buckle. She saw Rylan's muscles quiver, his bones straining. He was losing. He was seconds from being ripped apart. The cliff. Sienna's mind, honed in the Blackwood, in the Enclave, in the Deadfalls, snapped into a terrible, perfect clarity. She didn't try to summon her fire to the alpha. She called it to the stone beneath his feet. She dropped to her knees, slamming her palms onto the frozen plateau. She didn't push her power out. She invited the latent heat of the Earth's deep heart, the friction of the world's turning, the memory of sun in the rock. She was not a torch. She was a lightning rod. Now, Rylan, she screamed. A circle of stone around the two struggling titans, directly under the Blood Moon Alpha's feet, glowed not with her orange flame, but with a blinding, white-hot incandescence. The rock didn't explode. It liquefied, instantly superheating into a searing, molten pit. The Alpha's roar turned from rage to shock as his footing vanished into a hellish glow. His immense power faltered for one critical second, his dominance broken by primal surprise. Rylan, expecting it, used his last ounce of strength not to hold on, but to push. He released the Alpha and shoved with both hands, launching himself backward onto solid ground as the Blood Moon Alpha, his weight now unsupported, plunged into the searing stone. The ancient wolf's howl was cut short. There was a hiss like 1,000 serpents, a flash of unbearable light, and then silence. The white glow faded, leaving a smoldering, glass-smooth depression in the plateau. Of the Blood Moon Alpha, there was no sign. Only a wisp of acrid steam rising into the cold air. Rylan lay on his side at the pit's edge, bleeding, breathing in ragged, wet gasps. Sienna stumbled to him, the fire in her veins guttering out, leaving her hollow and shaking. Rylan, he rolled onto his back, his face a mask of blood and soot. His eyes found hers. The sun, he coughed, a painful sound. You didn't need it. The river was enough. A weak, hysterical sob of laughter escaped her. She pressed her hands to the worst wound on his shoulder, applying pressure. He's gone. The army below, he rasped. Without him, they're just wolves. Borak will break or flee. The wind, no longer held at bay by that immense presence, rushed back in, carrying the distant, confused sounds of battle from far below. The sounds were changing, fragmenting. The howls were of uncertainty, not war cries. They had won. The knowledge settled over Sienna like snow, quiet, immense, and chilling. She looked from Rylan's broken form to their children, sleeping through the end of the world. She looked at the glassy scar on the mountain where a tyrant had fallen. What do we do now? She whispered to the mountain, to the sky. Rylan's bloody hand found hers. His grip was weak, but its meaning was iron. We go home. The descent was slower. They did not take the spine. They found a longer, gentler slope on the eastern face, Sienna half supporting Rylan, the infant secured against them. They moved through a world transformed. By the time they reached the tree line, the sounds of battle had ceased. They emerged near the lightning-struck oak to find a contingent waiting, not of enemies, but of their own. Mara stood at the forefront, her arm in a sling, her face bruised but fierce. Behind her were 24 of Rylan's rogues, weary but standing tall. And beside Mara, under wary guard, stood Alara. The Silverfang Luna's fine clothes were torn, her face pale, but her head was high. Her eyes went immediately to the infants, then to Sienna, holding a weight of unspoken words. Mara stepped forward, her flinty eyes assessing Rylan's wounds, Sienna's exhaustion. The Blood Moon lines shattered when their Alpha's presence vanished from the field. Borak sounded the retreat. They're fleeing west, broken. She glanced at Alara. Silverfang is leaderless. Lucas disappeared during the clash. Some say he fled north when he saw the fire on the mountain. His pack is scattered, confused. Kale is trying to rally them, but their heart is gone. Rylan nodded, leaning heavily on Sienna. The Blackwood is ours. The mountains are ours. And the girl, Mara asked, her gaze settling on Sienna with a new, profound respect. No, not respect. Recognition. Sienna looked at Alara. You let us go, in the lodge. Why? Alara met her gaze, her voice quiet but clear. I was a political mate, not a blind one. I saw what he was doing, what he took from you. I have no love for rogues, she said, with a nod to Rylan. But I have less for monsters who steal children. My loyalty was to the pack he was poisoning. That pack is free of him now. She paused. I will return. I will guide what remains of Silverfang away from your borders. You have my word. It was not friendship. It was a treaty etched in the aftermath. Sienna believed her. She nodded. Mara's attention returned to the infants. And these... Sienna looked down at her son, then at Lyra in Rylan's careful arm. She took a deep breath of the free, cold air. This is Lion, she said, naming her son for the first time, his weight solid and real against her. And this is Lyra. She looked at Rylan. Our children, the heirs to the Blackwood. To the mountains. Rylan's arm tightened around her. To the free territories, he rumbled, his voice carrying to all the gathered wolves. Their reign begins in peace, but it will be defended with fire. A howl went up from Mara, not of war, but of allegiance. It was joined by others, a chorus that echoed through the pines, declaring a new order born from ash and resolve. Weeks later, in the deep mountain enclave, under a sky blazing with stars, Sienna stood on the watch ledge. Below, the rebuilt shelters glowed with hearthlight. The sounds were of industry, not fear, of life. Rylan came to stand beside her, his wounds healed to scars, his presence a steady warmth. He followed her gaze to the valley where Silverfang territory lay quiet under the moon. He's out there somewhere, Sienna said softly. Lucas. Yes, Rylan said. A ghost with a grudge, he will always be out there. But he is no longer the storm. He is just the wind howling at our walls. He looked at her. Does it trouble you? She thought of the fabricated bond, the betrayal, the stolen year with her daughter. The fury was a cold ember, banked but not extinguished. It fuels me, she said honestly. To build something here he can never touch. To make our children strong enough that no one can ever take from them what was taken from me. He nodded, understanding. We will. From a nearby shelter, a contented gurgle sounded, followed by Mara's low, amused voice soothing the twins. Sienna leaned into Rylan's side, his arm coming around her naturally, a tether not of fate, but of choice. Below them, their kingdom slept, guarded by cliffs and by the memory of fire. Above, the moon shone, not on an omega or a weapon or a lost heir. It shone on a queen, on a mother, on a woman who had carved her own destiny from ice and stone, and who would spend the rest of her days ensuring it remained free. The wind carried the scent of pine and future, and for the first time in her life, Sienna breathed it in without a trace of fear.